Chapter 1673. I really didn't expect that there are so many strange things in the boundless universe. The fruit that comes from a tree can actually be so square. If you say it's square, then so be it. What was even more amazing was that it could even give people a perfect visual deception. He was really a little speechless. On the surface of the fruit, there was an unusually hazy fog. It was very clear, like a white halo that surrounded the fruit. Holding it in his hand, his fingers couldn't actually touch the surface of the fruit at all. It could only be said that he was holding a ball of fog, and the fog was holding the fruit inside. Such a magical fruit, not to mention Chuyang, even the sword spirit had never seen such a miracle in his life. It's really magical. There's actually such a spiritual object in the world. The sword spirit was almost stunned. Suddenly, he exclaimed, there are actually naturally formed words on this fruit. Words? Chuyang was stunned and looked at it intently. He couldn't help but open his mouth wide. There were actually words. Not only were there words, but the words could actually move. 5 words, a symbol on the surface of the fruit, moving slowly and continuously, as if following some specific pattern: heaven, earth, black, yellow, fruit. Chuyang read out these words one by one. He couldn't help but suck in a cold breath. There are really 5 words. I'm afraid these are the names of this strange fruit. Heaven, earth, mystery, yellow fruit. What kind of fruit was this? Even the name grew on the fruit? And what kind of symbol was this? What did it mean? He didn't seem to have seen it before. It was like 2 fish sleeping with their necks stretched out, forming a strange circle, one black and one white. There was a white eye on the black fish's head, and a black eye on the white fish's head. What kind of symbol was this? As the strange fragrance continued to spread, the sword spirit suddenly cried out in alarm. This was because his body was actually within this strange fragrance. It was recovering continuously. The injuries from the battle with the Dharma Supreme were actually recovering without any medicine. And the reason for this amazing result was just the fragrance of this fruit. Just the fragrance alone could have such a great effect. What was going on? Chuyang and the sword spirit were flabbergasted. Then they turned their heads at the same time and looked at the fruit in Chuyang's hand. Just the fragrance alone is enough to completely heal my injuries. Sword spirit said in a trembling voice, you can't be thinking of eating me in one bite, right? Chuyang also took in a breath of cold air. He was sweating profusely. If he had swallowed the fruit in one gulp when he took it out, then he was sure that he would have exploded all over the tribulation space. Even the entire tribulation space had exploded. It wasn't surprising for Duo Zik to explode. This fruit contains a huge amount of energy. Even if 10 of you ate it, you would still be able to eat it. Even if 10 people work together, I'm afraid they won't be able to bear it. The sword spirit simply sensed the enormous medicinal power of the heaven-earth arcana yellow fruit, and his face turned pale with a swish. This kind of fruit contained a huge amount of pure medicinal power. To a martial artist whose cultivation wasn't high enough, it was simply an irresistible poison. The only result of consuming it was a body explosion. Chuyang was completely at a loss. The seal was finally opened after all the tricks, and the fruit with a huge amount of energy was taken out. But how was he going to eat it? This time, he didn't return empty-handed from a treasure mountain. He had a supreme elixir in his hand, but he didn't dare to eat it. He was even more at a loss. The energy contained in this fruit. The sword spirit smiled bitterly. He seemed a little hesitant and unsure. Sword master, the power of this fruit. In my most conservative estimation, it can make the most ordinary person start from nothing. Without any foundation, he can directly rush to the peak of the earth level. This is also the most conservative estimate. Chuyang was stunned. This time he was really stunned. Since Chuyang was reborn, he had many adventures. The heavenly treasures that he had obtained could be found in the entire heavenly layer. It was definitely worthy of the word, the most. There was no one else. It was the only one. However, this fruit had already beaten all of Chuyang's fortuitous encounters to the bottom of the valley. In fact, It seemed that all of his fortuitous encounters and heavenly treasures added together weren't as miraculous as this one fruit. This was a bit too exaggerated. Swordmaster's understanding of the so-called Earth level is probably still a little hazy. Let me give you a simple example. The so-called Earth level strength is a level higher than the current Dharma Supreme. The sword spirit grinned. At best, it's only a level lower than the peak level of the heavenly demon when he wasn't injured. I don't know when Sword Master will be able to understand it more clearly if I put it this way. Of course, the prerequisite for reaching the Earth level I'm talking about is, you have to be able to bear it. If one can't bear it, the result is very simple. With a bang, even the fruit and the person are gone. It was rare for the sword spirit to be so humorous. He said, "Of course, it can't be said that there's nothing there. If those scattered pieces of flesh and blood were buried in the soil, it would instantly make the trees within a radius of 100 miles grow to their limits. Then they would wither and turn into rotten wood, turning into fine powder. After that, in the following thousands of years, the treasures of heaven and earth would continue to grow and even mutate. It's definitely not a Leduo that the martial world yearns for. It's a rather simple matter." Chu Yang looked at the sword spirit with a fake smile. He gritted his teeth and said, "You're so damn humorous today. You're either dropping the ball or joking with me. You're really good? You're really good? You're really amazing." The sword spirit chuckled mischievously. It seemed as if he was gloating over Chu Yang's misfortune. Gloating over other people's misfortune. This sentence seemed to be somewhat contradictory. But this was the sword spirit's state of mind at the moment. This was the first time he saw Chu Yang completely helpless in the face of good things. It was completely different from his previous confident and smug self. Naturally, he was gloating a little. Of course, he was also worried about how to deal with this fruit. How could he not gloat and be depressed at the same time? One could only look but not eat. If it were anyone else, they would be so depressed that they wanted to die. Something's not right. Chu Yang frowned and said, "The fragrance of this fruit seems to be spreading very quickly." The two of them turned their heads at the same time. Then, they exclaimed at the same time. They saw that in the spiritual herbal garden in the tribulation space, the spiritual herbal garden had actually grown crazily in such a short time. The two of them looked at it in a daze. It took them a while to come back to their senses. This is just the effect of the heaven and earth mystery yellow fruit's fragrance? Wasn't this too perverted? Isn't this a little too exaggerated? Previously, the sword spirit said that it would be upgraded to the earth level was just a conservative estimate. Now, it seemed that it was indeed a conservative estimate. Too conservative. Chu Yang could clearly see that the jade snow spirit ginseng had already taken shape. But under the nourishment and infection of that fragrance, it unexpectedly started to sprout new branches. And the jade snow spirit ginseng's body was growing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Chu Yang was stunned. He was tongue-tied. This speed is too abnormal. It takes at least 500 years for the jade snow spirit ginseng to grow one round. He turned his head in a daze and exclaimed again. He saw that the hazy fog around the heaven and earth mystery yellow fruit had reduced by one circle. There were only 5 circles now. It turned out that the tribulation space couldn't prevent the medicinal power of the heaven and earth mystery yellow fruit from dissipating. The sword spirit shouted, "Quick!" Chu Yang quivered and instantly understood the sword spirit's meaning. With a whoosh, he got out of the tribulation space and went outside. Chu Yang understood the sword spirit's meaning very well. Although the energy in the fruit couldn't be absorbed now, at this speed, it was very likely that it could be absorbed in a while. And by the time he felt that it could be absorbed, the effect would have been greatly reduced. Therefore, he had to be prepared in advance. This really couldn't be delayed at all. Once there was that tendency, he had to take it without hesitation. Perhaps there was still the danger of it exploding when he discovered it, but once it entered his mouth, it could basically be digested. Gu Duxing and the rest were waiting outside, guarding him as if they were facing a great enemy. Chu Yang had just gone out when he shouted, "Tan Tan! Elder Wu! Come over quickly!" At this moment, he didn't even need to send a telepathic message. So what if he was a little shocked? Time was of the essence now. There was no time to waste. Upon hearing Chu Yang's extremely anxious voice, Tan Tan, Wu Jueqing and Chu Lu reacted almost subconsciously, flying over as if they were conditioned reflexes. They entered the room with a bang. Close the door. Seeing that all 13 of them were present, Chu Yang said hurriedly, "There's no time to explain anything now. Remember, everyone, don't act rashly. Be prepared and wait with your mouths open. Don't doubt, don't ask, just wait." Everyone was stunned. What was going on? Don't move? Wait with their mouths open? What did this mean? GMO really wanted to ask what was going on, but unexpectedly, Chu Yang suddenly disappeared in a flash. Mo Tianji made a prompt decision and shouted, "Everyone, if you have any questions, ask them later. Now open your mouths and wait." Mo Tianji knew that since Chu Yang said so, he must have his reasons. Moreover, the urgency in Chu Yang's voice and the way he came and went in a hurry already showed that this was definitely an extremely important matter. Therefore, he made a decision without hesitation. Everyone's eyes bulged at the same time as they looked at Mo Tianji. "Boss is going crazy, and you, the think tank, are going crazy too?" But Mo Tianji was already the first to open his mouth, his stern gaze sweeping over everyone. Chapter 1674. With a swoosh, the brothers all opened their mouths wide. Mo Qinggu, Family, and Chu Lu were naturally a little embarrassed, but they still opened their mouths obediently, their hearts full of doubts. GMO and Luo Kadi wanted to laugh when they saw this, but they didn't dare to be rash. They could only open their mouths and hold it in until their stomachs heaved. With their mouths open, not only could they not speak, but they also couldn't laugh. Chu Yang had already returned to the tribulation space, his eyes fixed on that super magical fruit. The sword spirit was fully focused on sensing the fluctuations of the medicinal power, and he only had time to ask, "How many people?" Or the original 11. "This time, 14 including me," Chu Yang answered quickly. "When I say it's about time, start immediately. Split this fruit into 14 pieces and send them into everyone's mouths at once. Any delay may cause a huge loss of cultivation. Understood? When I say it, there will definitely be more. When you split the fruit, it will definitely still be completely unbearable. But when you put it into your mouth, it will be almost everyone's limit," the sword spirit reminded. "Don't forget, Mo Lei and Chu Lu are not even second-grade supreme martial artists. You have to be more familiar with them, so it's better for them to have less." "I know." The two of them watched helplessly as the fog of the heaven-earth mystery yellow fruit gradually dissipated, their hearts aching. But they couldn't absorb it at all. There was really nothing they could do. Until now, it's still slightly over. That's about how. The sword spirit immediately reminded them after seeing that the fog of the heaven-earth mystery yellow fruit had already dissipated. This was the moment. Chu Yang picked up the fruit and flew out. Outside, Mo Tianji and the others were all standing with their mouths open strangely. In this situation, if an outsider accidentally came in, they would probably burst out laughing. "What's wrong with this tribulation brother?" All of them stood dumbfounded and did the same thing. What's going on? All of a sudden, an indescribable fragrance suddenly appeared in the air. Everyone had just smelled it when they saw a figure flash in front of them. Chu Yang flew out, and the next moment, everyone felt as if something was stuffed into their mouths. It was indeed just a little bit. How big was a fruit? How much could there be after it was divided into 14 portions? Just a little bit. Then they heard Chu Yang's voice saying, "Hurry up and shut up." "Patter." Everyone shut their mouths. He was about to ask, "Boss, what did you feed us?" It was gone with a roll of the tongue. How much use could such a small thing have? In the next moment, everyone experienced the effects of a little bit of fruit. A little bit of size didn't mean a little bit of foundation. This little bit of fruit was still enough to make over 10% of the martial artists in the heavenly layer explode. Immediately after, everyone could clearly feel the thing in their mouths melt in an instant and enter their stomachs in an instant. Then, a surge of spiritual energy, as if it could split the heavens and earth, suddenly rose from their dantian. This spiritual force was extremely powerful. Even if it was Wu Jueqing, He also felt that his soul was about to scatter. Just a little bit more. Could it be that this spiritual energy was caused by that little thing? Everyone had a clear feeling that if they didn't digest it quickly, they would explode and die in the next moment. There was absolutely no luck involved. As for Chu Luo and Mo Lei, who had the weakest cultivations, Chu Yang purposely reduced the dosage by 2/3. However, the two of them still couldn't take it and sat down with flushed faces. Immediately after, the steaming fog on their bodies had already flowed out. Then, it was the group of people, including GMO and Luo Kadi, who had slightly weaker cultivations. Chu Yang also consumed the fruit. However, as he circulated his cultivation madly to digest the medicinal effects, he observed everyone's reactions. At the same time, he hurriedly transmitted his voice to them, "Everyone, be careful. This is an extremely rare heavenly treasure. After consuming it, as long as you can take it, your cultivation will be able to increase almost limitlessly. But you must remember one thing. If it really reaches the point where you can't take it anymore, quickly open your mouth and use the circulation method in your dantian to swallow and spit out the excess spiritual energy that you can't absorb. Otherwise, your body will really explode and you will die. Remember, don't try to be brave." Chu Yang's speech was like a machine gun. 2. However, everyone heard it. Chu Yang had originally wanted to add, "You must swallow and spit it out only when you really can't take it anymore." However, the eruption of powerful spiritual energy had finally caused his dantian to completely explode. With a boom, it rushed up. He no longer had the mental strength to say another sentence. He had already sunk into a deep and boundless state of regulating his breathing. Actually, this sentence didn't seem to be necessary. Everyone knew and understood that since Chu Yang had already done this, then this was definitely an incomparable immortal opportunity. Such a great opportunity, if it wasn't in front of death, who would be willing to swallow and spit it out? In that case, according to Ji Mo's words, it would be enough to make the world lose its color. It would be enough to make the sun and moon lose its light. This time, it might be the real foundation for becoming a peerless expert in the future. Everyone gritted their teeth and bitterly enduring the peerless spiritual energy in their bodies crashing left and right. They felt that their meridians were being broken open little by little. Everyone could clearly feel that the meridians in their bodies were being penetrated by the tyrannical medicinal effects. Then, they were quickly filled with incomparably pure spiritual energy, completely occupying them. Then, it continued to break through the next meridian. This process sounded simple, but it was actually extremely painful. Even with Wu Jueqing's profound cultivation and extraordinary mental state, he had to close his eyes tightly and sweat profusely. As for Chu Yang, Mo Tianji, Gu Duxing and the others, it was even more unbearable. The muscles on their bodies were clearly spasming. Chu Yang only relied on his tenacious willpower and that instinct to move his body to Mo Qingwu's side. He used all his self-control to raise his hand and gently hug her slender waist. He couldn't even say a word. At this moment, he didn't seem to have the time or energy to speak at all. All of his mental strength, all of his willpower, all of his mental strength was fighting against this turbulent heat flow in his body. He must subdue it, completely tame it, completely turn it into his own power, into his own strength. At this moment, Mo Qingwu felt that she had obtained a solid support like a mountain. Her heart was filled with sweetness. Chu Yang didn't say anything, but Mo Qingwu already knew what he wanted to say. "Qingwu, hang in there. I'm right beside you. He's right beside me. Then what do I have to fear?" This time, Mo Qingwu was already almost unable to hang in there. But ever since Chu Yang's arm gently hugged her, she actually gained strength from who knows where. In a daze, she seemed to feel a lot better. Then her physique, which was far superior to others, played a great role. Slowly, she started to absorb that violent airflow. Gradually, she entered a state where she forgot about everything around her. She could only feel that there was a strong arm around her waist, protecting her forever. Dong Wushang and Mo Lei's hands were tightly clasped together, the two of them maintaining synchronized breathing. Luckily, When Chu Yang was dividing the fruits, he consciously reduced Mo Lei's portion. Luckily, Dong Wuxiang was right beside Mo Lei. Mo Lei's current cultivation was the weakest among them, even slightly below Chu Lu's. If not for the fact that the portion of fruits was small enough and Dong Wuxiang helped her bear the impact of the medicinal effects, she would really be in danger of exploding. After all, Wu Jueqing's cultivation was high and he was the most experienced. After the initial violent impact, he slowly adjusted his breathing. Although it was still uncomfortable, he was far from being as pathetic as the others. He even put a hand on Chu Lu's shoulder, trying his best to use his remaining strength to help his disciple absorb the medicinal effects. Chu Lu's talent was undoubtedly amazing, and her physique was also far superior to that of ordinary cultivators. But if she were to consume that little bit of fruits by herself, it would really be beyond her ability. Mo Tianji, who originally had a solemn expression, seemed to have sensed something. The stern expression on his face relaxed a little, and the thick white fog emitted from everyone's bodies gradually filled the entire room, actually showing signs of solidifying. Before this, more than 10 mid-grade supreme martial artists had joined forces to set up an extremely powerful supreme martial artist divine sense seal, which had already firmly controlled all the movements in this room. From the outside, there was only peace and tranquility. But inside the room, everyone's body was in a perilous situation. If they were not careful, they would be in danger of exploding. And once they exploded, not only would they die, it would also cause a chain reaction. No one in this room would be lucky enough to survive. They would definitely die. This time, the sword spirit also quietly revealed himself. With a solemn expression, he stood guard for everyone. He really didn't expect that just one heaven-earth arcana yellow fruit, and one that had already dissipated more than half of its spiritual energy, would actually have such a domineering effect when consumed by 14 people. It actually almost caused these 14 people to explode together. What kind of immense medicinal effects was this? His previous estimation was really too conservative. The sword spirit suddenly felt that the future was bright. Not to mention other things, just thinking about how there were so many heaven-earth arcana yellow fruits in Chu Yang's tribulation space, and how there seemed to be some unknown fruit of a higher level. And those thousands of miraculous elixirs in the elixir gardens that were improving with each passing day. Thinking about the heavy elixir and the 8 great elixirs that Chu Yang had never really revealed their true power ever since he obtained them, thinking about the Purple Cloud Heavenly Emperor's legacy and those countless souls of the purple crystals and holy crystals. How far could this Lord Sword Master reach in the end? Anticipation. Chapter 1675. At first, the sword spirit still thought that his future was bleak. But now, if someone told him that Chu Yang could reach the level of Shui Leihan, the sword spirit wouldn't be surprised at all. That was to be expected, all right? Even those at the level of an emperor might not be able to stop Sword Master Chu's footsteps. Then, would he eventually reach the level of that mighty person who created the Tribulation Sword? At this moment, the sword spirit thought of Chu Yang actually having a battle with that mighty person. He couldn't help but feel his blood boiling. If he had the chance to witness that battle with his own eyes, then his life wouldn't be in vain. Time passed bit by bit. Chu Yang and the rest were still quietly digesting the huge medicinal power. Waves of breakthrough aura burst out continuously in this room, but it was firmly suppressed in the room by the 14 unusually strong supreme martial artists' divine senses. Not a single bit leaked out in the tribulation space. The heaven-earth arcana yellow fruits energy, which had dissipated at the beginning, was still working. The spiritual herbal garden was moving forward as if it was running. The quality of all the spiritual herbs was improving rapidly. Such a shocking change. Even if Duke Yu came again and used all his strength, he wouldn't be able to achieve such a scene. The 3 jade snow spirit ginsengs actually jumped out of the spiritual herbs garden quietly. They were like 3 snow-white fist-sized dolls, shaking their heads and moving their hands and feet. A faint pink color actually appeared on their lifelike little faces. That was a sign that the spiritual herbs had completely taken shape, completely matured, and even had their own consciousness. If they could take another step forward, These 3 jade snow spirit ginsengs could even reach the terrifying stage of transforming into spiritual herbs, becoming spiritual existences like the sword spirit. If that was the case, Chu Yang's spiritual herbs garden would have 3 more omnipotent butlers. As long as a spiritual herb wanted a spiritual herb to mature, then, no matter what kind of spiritual herb it was, as long as it didn't exceed the level of a spiritual herb, then it could mature overnight. From a seed to a fully matured spiritual herb, it would only take a single thought from a spiritual herb. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that there were 3 more Dukyu. It seemed that the real Dukyu might not be able to do this. But, to make these 3 jade snow spirit ginsengs truly become spiritual herbs, it would require even more spiritual energy. Whether it could succeed in the end would depend on Chu Yang's efforts. Tribulation space. The great elixirs that Chu Yang had previously collected. It was the mysterious ice jade paste and the mysterious yang jade essence. The heavenly heart of wind, lightning, and the others were all growing at a relatively slow speed, but still visible to the naked eye. The portion that Chu Yang had originally used was silently replenished and returned back to normal. It seemed that the elites of this land of great elixirs were also taking the opportunity to quietly change their own quality. However, no one knew just how far they would go. However, no one was aware of all these changes. Because Chu Yang was working hard to improve himself, even the sword spirit was outside. Naturally, no one noticed the changes in the tribulation space. The tribulation space wasn't completely empty. There seemed to be another person, a living dead. Wu Qianqian had been kept in the tribulation space for protection ever since she had received a fatal injury. However, she had been nourished by the enormous energy of the heaven-earth mystery yellow fruit. And she had also undergone a miraculous transformation. Previously, Chu Yang had specially prepared a private room for Wu Qianqian. It was a complete boudoir for a young girl. The tassels of the fragrant tent. Warm bedding, fragrance permeated the air, and spiritual power circulated. Wu Qianqian was still lying quietly on the bed, that head of fine black hair. She was lying on the pillow softly. The corners of her mouth were still curled up in that pitiful, faint, and satisfied smile. She was motionless. Since she had been injured last time, Chu Yang had thought of all sorts of ways to help her. He didn't know how many miraculous elixirs he had fed Wu Qianqian. He had even fed her several complete heavy pills. However, Wu Qianqian's condition showed no signs of improvement. It seemed that besides the legendary resurrection grass, there was no other way to save her. This result made Chu Yang's heart ache. Every day, he would come and feed Wu Qianqian some of the spring of life. Every once in a while, Chu Yang would stay here for a period of time to accompany this unfortunate senior sister apprentice and this unfortunate beauty. However, Wu Qianqian's condition never improved. This peerless beauty with a heart of orchid and a heart of gold was lying there with a faint smile of satisfaction on her face. Her face was deathly pale, which made the faint satisfied smile on her lips seem even more miserable. It seemed that when she had used her life to block that fatal blow for Chu Yang, the meaning of her life had been fully expressed. She was already satisfied. Every time he thought of that day, that moment, that instant, Chu Yang's heart would ache so much that he wished he was dead. But now, the situation seemed to be very different. As the huge medicinal power of the heaven-earth mystery yellow fruit spread, Wu Qianqian's originally miserable complexion actually gradually changed. She slowly became fair and tender. There was even a hint of redness. Except for the fact that she was still unconscious, she was now a beautiful beauty in a deep sleep. She slept quietly and sweetly, as if she was having an infinitely beautiful dream. That was all. It had been a whole day and night in Chu Yang's room, and there was no sound of movement. The Feng and Yu couple found this strange and had come over to check it out. But when they sensed the seal set up by the combined efforts of 14 peak supreme martial artists, they understood what was going on. They didn't choose to force their way in. Instead, they stood quietly at the door, guarding. Something extremely important must have happened inside. Ling Muyang had sent out all the existing experts of the Ling clan to find out about the law enforcement officers, especially the Dharma Supreme himself. Then, he tried his best to collect all the corpses and cremate them, trying his best to prevent the outbreak of the plague. Other than the continuous influx of outsiders, peace seemed to have been restored. A delicate balance. A delicate peace. Everything was like the last calm before the storm. Many outsiders who came later still had the desire to participate in the Tianding Grand Meeting. They were still dreaming of joining the ranks of the law enforcement officers and making a great leap. They didn't know that the Tianding Grand Meeting that they had longed for had long ceased to exist in name. This wasn't strange. It was just that this heavenly continent was a little too vast. Although there were beacons everywhere, but those who didn't know the inside story were still the majority. After all, the martial world was chaotic. Without chaos, how could it be called the martial world? However, after these people entered the capital and found out the whole story, they realized that the situation had deteriorated to such an extent. Even if they wanted to withdraw or return home, it had already become an impossible dream. For a moment, everyone stomped their feet and thumped their chests. They didn't expect that they would plunge headfirst into a huge whirlpool when they came here full of enthusiasm. They were in a situation of certain death. Oh my God. Oh my God. Open your eyes and take a look. In the capital, the eyes of the people of the various big clans had completely turned red. They had been preparing for war all day and all night. Everyone knew that the law enforcement officers were now outside, eyeing covetously. They were crazily hunting down the remaining people of the big clans in the entire continent. They were just waiting for them to think that they had completed their mission outside. When the people of the big clans that they wanted to kill were all dead, their vanguard, they would point straight at the capital. By then, the capital would become the site of the tragic final battle. Or, they were already at the assembly point outside the capital, but where was the real main force of the law enforcement officers? It had completely become an unsolvable mystery now. The people of the big clans in the capital were all hoping that this final battle would come sooner. Such a painful and torturous feeling really made them feel like they were waiting for death. It was too unbearable. Death might not be that scary. Perhaps it would happen in the blink of an eye. But waiting for death was the most unbearable. Every day felt like a year. But as unbearable as it was, they also secretly hoped that the day would come as late as possible. It was best that it didn't come. That was because he still had his family, his brothers, and his loved ones outside. If the main force of the law enforcement officers really came, it would mean that all those people were dead and there would be no more hope. That would be a very painful thing. Time passed by quietly. Even Yi Chunshan and the other higher-ups were getting more and more anxious. What exactly was the Dharma Supreme doing? What exactly was his purpose? Why was there no news at all now? On the afternoon of the second day after Chu Yang and the others went into seclusion, there was suddenly new news. The law enforcement officers are starting to gather from all over the world towards the capital. The blood payers of the law enforcement officers are quickly gathering towards the capital. The slogan of the law enforcement officers has been spread. Bloodbath in the capital. This shocking news swept through the entire capital like a hurricane. Everyone who heard this news had their faces turn pale. Bloodbath in the capital. It was actually such an extreme and bloody slogan. In the capital, this news spread like a plague. Those who originally surrendered because they couldn't win were now in complete despair. There was no other way except to fight to the death. Now, the world outside was completely under the control of the law enforcement officers. All those who dared to resist had already become corpses. It was already difficult to estimate how many people died in this battle. But it was definitely an astronomical number. And what everyone really didn't expect was the Dharma Supreme was actually doing this. He sent out a huge amount of manpower and resources to record the results and casualties of this battle and to make a complete tally. And he even announced the final bloody results of this insane massacre to the world. Such a strange mentality and action made everyone gnash their teeth in hatred. Moreover, it was abnormally incomprehensible. There had never been such a crazed person since ancient times. The Dharma Supreme even issued a proclamation for this purge of the world. The event in Beijing on the 20th was postponed. I was at home, but I still had to go to Pride's publishing house in Fujian on the 28th. I had no choice but to cancel the ticket from Beijing to Fujian and change it to Jinan. Chapter 1676. The Dharma Supreme's proclamation infuriated everyone in the city. I have been in charge of the heaven for more than 13,000 years. I have always worked hard to bring benefits to the world. I have a clear conscience. Now that the extraterrestrial demons are causing trouble, the big clans and martial artists of the pugilistic world are following them. I do not wish to kill too many people, but for the sake of the world, I can only wield my knife and cleanse the world. This is a helpless action, but for the 100,000 years of glory of the law enforcement officers, billions of lives in the heaven, I have no choice but to do so. My heart aches and regrets. In this battle, the world has changed, and the sun and moon have lost their light. After 20 days, the results are beginning to show. In the Southeast War Zone, a total of 437,580 traders of the Shao clan were killed. In addition, more than 335,500 traders of the pugilistic world were killed. They were burned to the ground. The law enforcement officers' headquarters lost 373,000 traders, listed in the law enforcement officers' shrine. The Southeast War Zone lost 17,000 blood payers, and all the compensation has been paid. In the Southwest War Zone, a total of 330,000 traders were killed. Wherever the law enforcement officers pointed their weapons, all the traders were killed. The Southwest Law Enforcement Officers' headquarters lost more than 300,000 people. The losses in this battle are huge. For the sake of the heaven, our loyal souls will never die. In the Northwest War Zone, more than 70,000 traders were killed. The law enforcement officers' headquarters lost more than 20,000 traders. In the North War Zone, a total of 273,000 traders were killed. The law enforcement officers' headquarters lost 108,000 traders. In the South War Zone, a total of 103,400 traders were killed. The law enforcement officers' headquarters lost 530,000 traders. The law enforcement officers in the South perished together with the enemy. Our loyal souls will never die. In the West War Zone, more than 500,000 traders were killed. The law enforcement officers' headquarters lost 230,000 traders. One of them is a second-grade supreme martial artist and an eighth-grade supreme martial artist. Our loyal souls will never die. In the East War Zone, more than 850,000 traders were killed. About 1 million troops were invested in this battle, and more than half of the law enforcement officers were killed. Our loyal souls will never die. In the Northeast War Zone, more than 710,000 traders were killed, and the law enforcement officers' headquarters lost 475,000 traders. Our loyal souls will never die. We, the law enforcement heroes, have killed all the traders in the periphery. Currently, only the capital is still occupied by the extraterrestrial demons. We are here for the big picture, to cleanse the capital with blood and rule the world. There may have been accidental injuries, but we had no choice. Where the vanguard is pointed is the capital. Ancestors, please bless and protect me. Please bless me to succeed in this battle and return the heavenly layer a clear sky and bright sun. Battle reports from the law enforcement officers were constantly transmitted to the capital. They were like sharp knives that stabbed into the chests of the remaining members of the big clans. For a moment, the sound of cursing filled the air. The Dharma Supreme's irresponsible remarks, pointing at a deer as a horse and inverting right and wrong, had infuriated everyone in the Poison tribe. From a certain perspective, it had instead become a great mobilization before the battle for the Poison tribe. Too shameless. Too despicable. You've already done all the bad things, yet you're actually standing on the side of justice, standing on the moral high ground, framing others, suppressing others. This was intolerable. So many people had already died. It was impossible for them to let this matter rest. Moreover, the huge amount of data contained in the battle report made everyone's heart turn cold, and they broke out in cold sweat. So cruel. However, this battle was only recorded by the enforcers. More than 1 million Jianghu experts in the heavenly layer had died. More than 1 million people. This was such a huge number. It was really a number of people. Everyone who heard this news broke out in cold sweat, and they were speechless for a long time. Now, after the Dharma Supreme commanded his law enforcement officers to kill 1 million people, he actually wanted to continue the bloodbath in the capital. One must know that the current capital, not counting the ordinary citizens, the number of Jianghu experts alone was already more than 10 million. And the bloodbath in the capital meant to kill all these 10 million people? The Dharma Supreme's actions could only be described as absolute madness. Comparing a steady wise man and a crazy wise man, the latter was definitely more than 10 times more dangerous than the former. A steady wise man would have such concerns, and there would be limitations in his actions. However, a crazy wise man would not have any more concerns. Therefore, the lethality and the disaster that he could cause would be 10 times, or even 100 times more. The disasters that the Dharma Supreme brought about were already the best explanation. When a wise man did good, he could bring blessings to the world. When a wise man did evil, he could bring chaos to the world. A crazy wise man was really too scary. The law enforcement officers' army in the southeast has already been assembled and is on the way. No one would have thought that the law enforcement officers in the southeast would be the first to be assembled. The law enforcement officers' army has burned down all the mountains along the way. Anyone who stands in their way will be eradicated without question. All the martial arts clans along the way have been forcibly recruited into the army. Those who dare to disobey will be considered to be subordinate to the big clans. The only outcome is the extermination of their entire clan. The follow-up information became more and more detailed. The law enforcement officers' army in the south has also been assembled and is about to move north. The army in the west has been assembled and is ready to move out. Each piece of news was like a talisman of death, bombarding the hearts of the big clans wave after wave. The law enforcement officers' army swept over like rolling waves, and their momentum was unparalleled. Looking from the tallest mountain outside the capital, one could only see billowing smoke and dust everywhere, covering the sky and earth. The army had yet to arrive, but their momentum was already overwhelming. The momentum of gaining the upper hand by a show of strength was already formed. The Dharma Supreme actually ordered all the law enforcement officers and bloodpayers in the world as an army. The most admirable thing is that he actually managed to organize and form them. When martial artists become qualified soldiers, the combat power of this army will be difficult to estimate. Jianghu stood at the top of the mountain, his expression solemn. The formation of this law enforcement officers' army is completely built on the foundation of high death pressure. Zhuge Tongqiong, who was standing beside him, looked defeated. His eyes shone with extreme hatred as he said hatefully, "When the army was first formed, the Dharma Supreme had already passed down the order that all the armies must strictly implement militarized management. If one disobeyed, kill one. If 10,000 disobeyed, kill 10,000. The order must be strictly enforced. Those who disobeyed will be killed without mercy." In addition, there was another order that was extremely out of line. All the law enforcement officers in the world are to gather outside the capital. When the time comes, if any law enforcement officers are unable to form an army, the rest of the law enforcement officers can gather and slaughter them. Along the way, because they disobeyed the order, the number of law enforcement officers and bloodpayers who were killed must be more than 100,000. Only then can such an army be formed. This is madness. Terrifying madness. Terrifying madness. Jianghu took a deep breath. Since time immemorial, it seemed that only the Dharma Supreme could do something like this. If they were unable to form an army, the rest of the law enforcement officers would gather and slaughter them. One must know that this was not just 10 or 100 people, but the heads of as many as 1 million people. The Dharma Supreme could actually kill whenever he wanted without the slightest hesitation. This had already exceeded the limits of the so-called decisiveness in killing. It was basically no longer treating lives as lives. The Dharma Supreme now basically treats this world as a slaughterhouse. In his eyes, The lives of all the living beings in the world are probably just some breathing corpses or insignificant ants. What harm is there in death? Zhuge Zangqiong let out a long sigh. Yes, all the living beings in the world and the heroes of the martial world are already his targets of destruction. This is something he has already made very clear. Diwu Qingru said, even the law enforcement officers whom he has led for more than 10,000 years, the law enforcement officers who see him as a god. They are also his targets of destruction. Or perhaps, all the living beings on this continent are his targets of destruction. At the side, Chen Yingfeng said coldly, this piece of land will be the last place that the Dharma Supreme will try his best to destroy. After destroying this place, there will no longer be any forces in the world that will dare to go against him, nor will there be any forces that can go against him. Qiu Yu frowned and turned to look at Chen Yingfeng. She said indifferently, Chen Yingfeng, you seem very excited. Are you looking forward to the arrival of the great battle? Chen Yingfeng smiled bitterly. Why wouldn't I? Our old Chen clan is almost all dead now. What does it matter if a few more people die in this world? Xiao Chenyu sneered. Chen Yingfeng, your family is all dead. Do other people's families also have to be dead for you to be satisfied? Chen Yingfeng sneered. I already have nothing left to live for. You can say whatever you want. Shut up. Yi Qinshin shouted angrily. Even if you have nothing left to live for, don't tell me you don't even want to take revenge. Chen Yingfeng snorted with a defeated expression. He lowered his head and didn't say another word. The Dharma Supreme has come with an overwhelming force this time. How should we deal with it? The war is dangerous now. It is the time for everyone to come up with ideas or discuss it. We might be able to come up with a good countermeasure. Yi Qinshin's voice sounded a little tired. The only thing we can do now is to gather all the martial forces in the capital into an army. Otherwise, it will be difficult to resist, said Zhuge Zangqiong. As for this section, I've been doing it for the past few days. However, we don't have the high pressure of death on the Dharma Supreme's side, so the effect isn't very good. Diwu Qingru sighed softly. As a veteran of the battlefield, how could he not know how terrifying an army formed by martial artists was? However, the difficulty of forming such an army was equally high. Without the high pressure of death on the Dharma Supreme, there was really no effective method. At least, it wouldn't be effective in the short term. Sherpa Xio's injuries had more or less recovered by now. He said, in the past few days, there hasn't been any movement on the Tribulation Sword Master's side. Instead, it is Ling Muiyang who is actively preparing for war. I think that immature Tribulation Sword Master has long been scared out of his wits by the Dharma Supreme. 90% of his cultivation was obtained through external help. Facing such a great battle in the future, escaping is the most normal thing to do. Chen Yingfeng said sarcastically. There was an earthquake in Lai Wu yesterday, but I was asleep during the earthquake and didn't feel anything. I missed it. It was only today that I found out. I even argued with others until my face turned red. Where was the earthquake? Where was the earthquake? There was none. Chapter 1677. Chen Yingfeng sneered and said in a sarcastic tone, and those few people around the Tribulation Sword Master, they are all little hairs that have yet to shed all their hair. Not to mention not doing anything. Even if they were to do anything, would they be able to repel the Dharma Supreme's enforcers? What legend of tribulation, ba? Xiao Chenyu looked at Chen Yingfeng coldly and said, Yingfeng, are you crazy too? You can say anything about Chu Yang and his brothers, but can you blaspheme the words legend of tribulation? Everyone else glared at him. Qiu He and Shi roared and almost wanted to rush up and beat Chen Yingfeng up. Legend of tribulation included their father. Chen Yingfeng's words definitely angered everyone. Yi Qinshin said majestically, stop quarreling, go back and prepare to divide the forces in the city. Then we'll gather experts to lead us. Whether we live or die, let's fight to the death. At this juncture, we'll die if we don't fight. Fight with all your might and still have a chance. Chen Yingfeng laughed bitterly and took the lead to leave. He didn't even look back. This is the approximate distribution of all the forces in the city. I've already divided them into teams in 8 directions. Now, we just lack a capable leader. Diwu Qingru handed over a piece of paper with the division of forces written on it. It even included how many people there were in each area, how much combat power they could form, who to contact, who to lead, who had the highest prestige, who had the most influence, who had the most financial resources, how to form an army, how to form a team to unleash stronger combat power, and so on. There were clear instructions. While everyone was flying around like headless flies, Diwu Qingru had already done all this with the weak strength of his clan. His painstaking efforts were evident. One must know that in such a short period of time, how difficult it was to analyze all the forces in the world in a clear and logical manner. Diwu Qingru definitely didn't sleep in these few days. Thank you for your hard work, Clan Master Diwu. Yi Qinshan took a look at it and couldn't help but be moved. The Yi clan was the one with the most complete strength among all the clans. It was also the local tyrant here, but there was no targeted strategy at all. Compared to Diwu Qingru's actions, the difference was obvious. Even though Yi Qinshan, he couldn't help but feel extremely ashamed. At the moment of life and death, for a chance of survival, I'm just doing my best. Diwu Qingru smiled freely. Although the final outcome may still end in tragedy, no matter what, we can't just sit and wait. Only by doing our best can we die without regrets. Yes, we can't sit and sit and sit. Only by doing your best can you die without regret. Yi Qinshan repeated softly, somewhat lost in thought. Soon after, the patriarchs read through the paper and flew away with grave expressions on their faces. Now, it was a critical moment. Time waits for no man. He had to take immediate action. He had to take action as soon as possible. Or they could have a little more chance. When Diwu Qingru left, Yi Qinshan was still standing alone at the highest point of the platform with his hands behind his back. High up in the sky, the strong winds howled and blew at Yi Qinshan's black clothes and robes, almost dispersing him into nothingness. A bleak and desolate aura emanated from his body. Diwu Qingru only glanced at it. He sighed inwardly, feeling his heart heavy. How he wished he could kick Yi Qinshan down the mountain. Because he could already tell that Yi Qinshan had lost all hope. Yi Qinshan and the Yi clan were already the ones with the highest cultivation and the most complete strength among the allied forces. Yet even he had lost all hope. Although he still had the mentality to fight to the death, he no longer had the confidence to win. Yi Qinshan was currently the one with the highest prestige and status among the big clans. Following a commander who had no confidence in the upcoming battle, how could they fight this battle? The outcome of this battle was already obvious. Diwu Qingru sighed silently and ran down the mountain like a shooting star. He ran toward the capital city. He only wanted to see Chu Yang now. He really wanted to ask, Chu Yang, Tribulation Sword Master, do you have any other ideas? Most importantly, Diwu Qingru absolutely believed that even if the Yi clan gave up, Yi Qinshan gave up, and everyone else in the world gave up, Chu Yang would never give up. Diwu Qingru had never doubted this. He had always believed in it. Tribulation Sword Master had always been a legend. A legend was one who created glory in many impossible situations. Back then, when Chu Yang went to Iron Cloud Nation, wasn't the situation similar to now? Iron Cloud back then was just like the capital city now. And the Dharma Supreme now was more or less the same as when he led Great Zhao back then. The advantages and disadvantages of both sides could be seen at a glance. Everyone thought that Iron Cloud was bound to lose. If it were anyone else, they might not have much confidence and might have given up long ago. But Chu Yang jumped up and down and turned the situation around. He won the battle that was impossible to win. Diwu Qingru was full of admiration for such a fighting spirit that would never give up on any opportunity. Honestly speaking, if I were in Chu Yang's position at that time, let alone succeeding in my struggle, I'm afraid I wouldn't even have the thought of struggling. Therefore, when Diwu Qingru went down the mountain this time, he went straight to Chu Yang's base. To be honest, Diwu Qingru also had a lot of ideas. He wanted to see how Sword Master Chu would jump up and down this time. Could he really jump up and down with hope? even if he couldn't jump up in the end and could die together with Tribulation Sword Master. Diwu Qingru felt that he had nothing to regret. Soon, he arrived at the inn. Ling Muyang's fierce face as a guard gave Diwu Qingru a fright. Oh my god. This Sword Master Chu is too arrogant. He actually let the old ancestor of the Ling clan guard the door here? You're looking for Chu Yang? He's in seclusion now. Ling Muyang said, I'm here to guard. What's with your look? Do you think I'm a waiter? Seeing Diwu Qingru's expression, Ling Muyang was a little angry and amused. He's in seclusion now? Diwu Qingru was delighted. The expression on his face just now was of course faked. If he didn't have a surprised expression when he saw Ling Muyang as a guard, this old ancestor of the Ling clan would probably be angrier. Then he thought, Chu Yang didn't go into seclusion earlier or later, but chose to do so now. It's definitely a good thing. Then he asked, how many days has Sword Master Chu been in seclusion? 2 days and 2 nights. Ling Muyang's impression of Diwu Qingru was quite good. In his opinion, there weren't many people in big clans who could do things, but this Diwu Qingru was definitely a capable one. Although his cultivation was more or less low now, his scheming was really unparalleled in the world. 2 days? That's good. 2 days of seclusion, very good. Diwu Qingru heaved a sigh of relief and said sincerely, the longer, the better. As long as he comes out before the law enforcement officers attack. Ling Muyang was a little surprised by Diwu Qingru's reaction. Diwu Qingru's confidence in Chu Yang, the Tribulation Sword Master, is a little too much? It seems that even I don't have as much confidence as him. Since Chu Yang is in seclusion, then I'll talk to Emo Tianji. We can be considered old friends. Diwu Qingru smiled. Emo Tianji? Emo Tianji is also in seclusion. They are in seclusion together. Ling Muyang rolled his eyes. All the Tribulation brothers are in seclusion together, as well as Wu Jueqing and that Saint King from the 3 Stars Divine clan called Tan Tan, Chu Yang's junior brother. They are in seclusion together? Really? Then it means that things have taken a turn for the better. It's a good thing. Diwu Qingru was completely excited. With the sudden turn of the crisis, Diwu Qingru decided not to leave. He sat down here, ordered a few dishes and drank with Ling Muyang. The most important thing now was still here. As long as Chu Yang could hold on, the Heavens continent would be fine in the end. As for the more than 10 million Jianghu experts in the capital, as well as the remaining forces of the big clans, in Diwu Qingru's eyes, they were still just cannon fodder. Since the Dharma Supreme said to purge, then it must be purged. Maybe they couldn't purge the Tribulation Sword Master, but to purge the other people with the current strength of the Dharma Supreme and the law enforcement officers, it was no pressure at all. What are Yi Qinshan and the others doing now? Ling Muyang asked. They are also preparing for war. Diwu Qingru was still very respectful to this old ancestor of the Ling clan, so he answered very respectfully. Preparing for war? There was a faint pain in the depths of Ling Muyang's eyes, but he snorted and said, a bunch of ungrateful people, short-sighted people. What's the use of preparing for war? Hoping for a fluke? After scolding, he didn't wait for Diwu Qingru to speak and sighed first. Sigh. In the end, there is no right or wrong. After all, we are brothers for more than 10,000 years. Diwu Qingru knew that he was in a complicated mood at the moment. He just smiled and drank with him, but didn't bring the topic to the ancestors of the Zhu clan. Ling Muyang sighed deeply. Time passed quietly. The capital was already in a state of panic, and every bush and tree was an enemy. Although the main force of the law enforcement officers hadn't arrived yet, the people in the city could already clearly feel that there seemed to be countless strong pressure coming from all directions, sweeping towards the capital. For a moment, everyone felt a kind of pressure that made it hard for them to breathe. Under the call of the big clans, the majority of the Jianghu experts who had resolutely joined the war this time were in the majority. Only a few people still wanted to wait and see what would happen next, but these people were instantly turned into hundreds of thousands of corpses under Yi Qinshan's command. The corpse-dissolving powder was scattered over, and wisps of green smoke rose in spirals. Chapter 1678. Hundreds of thousands of people turned into corpses with just one order. For a moment, the air above the capital was filled with the smell of corpses, lingering for a long time. The smell made one want to vomit. Before the army of the Dharma Supreme arrived, this place had already been cleaned up. This massacre made all the martial artists of the pugilistic world keep quiet out of fear. They were also much more obedient to the orders issued by the big clans. The effect was immediate. There wasn't even a trace of wind above the capital. It was already late autumn, but the weather was unbelievably hot. The air seemed to have stopped flowing. On the streets, everyone came and went hurriedly, not saying a word, with a sullen face. The expression on their faces was like that of walking zombies. Their eyes emitted green light and their expressions were ferocious. It was as if they didn't like anyone and couldn't wait to kill them all. It was finally the morning of the third day of Chu Yang and the rest's seclusion. Suddenly, there was a commotion in the entire capital. They're here, they're really here. Someone shouted on the streets, his voice sounding as if he was about to cry. They're here. The army of law enforcement officers is here. More people also shouted. Some of them had decent cultivation, but when they heard this news, they were so scared that they sat down on the ground. The law enforcement officers were here. The end of the world was finally here. Everyone looked up at the same time. In the sky above the capital, clouds of smoke slowly floated in from all directions. Ling Muyang was about to go out and check the situation when Feng Yuro came out with a swoosh. She instructed simply, "I'll go and check the situation. You pay attention to this place and ensure that it's safe and quiet. Don't let anything disturb the people in seclusion." Ling Muyang was naturally very respectful in front of Feng Yuro. He bowed and replied, "Yes." Before he finished his sentence, Feng Yuro had already disappeared. It was only at this moment that they heard a swoosh in the air. A clear space crack appeared in front of them. It was Feng Yuro who flew rapidly and directly cut through the space. Swoosh! Feng Yuro appeared on the highest peak of the capital and looked around. She couldn't help but sigh in her heart. The law enforcement officers and the Dharma Supreme were really here. Now, although she still couldn't see any law enforcement officers. However, thousands of miles away, one could clearly see thick smoke rising from all directions. It was as if the wind and clouds in the sky had suddenly gathered from all directions and were surging towards this location. An extremely evil and dark murderous aura appeared in the distance, even though it was thousands of miles away. It could also be easily distinguished. The Dharma Supreme's law enforcement officer army would need at least several million soldiers to create such a shocking effect. Looking at the thick smoke and dust that gradually covered the entire sky, Feng Yuro already knew that the Dharma Supreme was about to encounter something that could burn. All of them were ignited. Not only were there houses, residences, and farmlands, but there were also mountains and dense forests. Everything that could have been set ablaze. Dharma Supreme, why have you become so extreme? A hint of pain appeared in Feng Yuro's eyes as she muttered to herself, "The original you had a greater purpose. Treating the master of the calamity sword is against the purpose of the law enforcers of the past. But you are not a heartless person. Why are you so extreme now? You've implemented many methods. The measures made it clear that you were doing this for the good of the continent. But now, why did it become like this? Even if it was due to the influence of the extraterrestrial demon, it shouldn't be like this. Just to vent the grievances and pain in your heart, you have to massacre the world like this." Feng Yuro stood there in a daze. Her heart was filled with questions, but she did not know how to vent them or who to ask. Thinking of the countless lives that must have been lost behind the black smoke, she could not help but feel a sharp pain in her heart. This was originally a harmonious world that she, her husband, and the countless law enforcement officers of the past generations had painstakingly built for tens of thousands of years. But it was destroyed by that person just like that. "Dharma Supreme!" Feng Yuro shouted. Her voice was like a sharp arrow that pierced through the sky and spread far and wide, turning into rolling thunder in the sky. At the same time, it exploded above the heads of everyone within thousands of miles. "Dharma Supreme! Come out and answer me!" Feng Yuro shouted, "I'm Feng Yuro. Down below, everyone's hearts were shaken. Feng Yuro. Supremacy Feng and Supremacy Yu, the guardians of the heavens. Feng Yuro and Supremacy Yu could be said to be the second most powerful law enforcement officers after the Dharma Supreme. I don't care if you are Dongfang Baidao or Diwu Chochong. Come out. Come out right now. Feng Yuro shouted, You dare to make such a big fuss, but you don't even have the courage to talk to me? Come out. In the sky, following Feng Yuro's roar, a series of rolling thunder also exploded at the same time, roaring in the sky. However, the rolling thunder was still unable to suppress Feng Yuro's voice. The sky was filled with clouds and dust, and streaks of lightning flashed through it. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Yi Qinshan and the others also flew up the mountain and stood behind Feng Yuro. Feng Yuro ignored the arrival of this group of people, as if she did not notice them. Everyone also did not speak, only standing respectfully behind her. After a long time, an elegant voice drifted over from afar. It was the Dharma Supreme's voice. Supremacy Feng, long time no see. Feng Yuro shouted, Tell me, what do you want? What will make you stop? The Dharma Supreme's deep laughter sounded. Supremacy, you are asking the wrong person when you ask me what will make me stop. The heavens have already been invaded by the extraterrestrial demons. As the Dharma Supreme, it is my duty to lead the law enforcement officers to purge the demonic aura. Even if I have to pay a huge price for it, I will not hesitate. I know that Supremacy Feng is compassionate and benevolent. However, I hope that Supremacy Feng will not continue to persuade me. It is meaningless. Feng Yuro's delicate body trembled slightly. She said sternly, Dharma Supreme, a real man should have a clear conscience when doing things. Have you ever been embarrassed to confuse right and wrong like this? The Dharma Supreme said quietly, The weather today is not very good, it is going to rain soon. Supremacy Feng, the wind and rain are cold, please take care of yourself. At this point, there was actually no more sound. No matter what Feng Yuro said, the Dharma Supreme's voice did not appear again. After a while, a thunderclap exploded and bean-sized raindrops fell. Very quickly, a thin layer of dust and smoke splashed up from the ground, which was then washed away by the heavy rain. The wind whistled fiercely. Between heaven and earth, it was a vast expanse. In the clouds above, bolts of lightning crisscrossed, forming a series of thunderclaps that rumbled continuously. Between heaven and earth, it became darker and darker, until one could not even see one's own fingers. Only at the moment when the thunderclaps flashed, could this world that had completely turned into darkness, as well as the rain that was pouring down crazily. It was as if the heavens were also enraged by this extremely cruel massacre in the human world. Feng Yuro and the rest stood at the top of the mountain, drenched from head to toe by the rain. Their bodies were cold, and even their hearts were icy cold. Supremacy Feng, Yi Qinshan called out in a dry voice. Let's fight. No matter what we say now, there is no meaning. Feng Yuro did not turn back. She only said quietly, regardless of life or death, victory or defeat, we already have no other choice. We can only fight. Yi Qinshan, Xiao Chenyu and the rest had a mournful look on their faces. Suddenly, deafening shouts came from all directions at the same time. It was all the law enforcement officers shouting at the top of their lungs at the same time. Massacre do! Massacre do! Massacre do! Such a shocking sound seemed to have caused the entire place to tremble. Even the mountain under everyone's feet was trembling. Crashing sounds could be heard as rocks continuously rolled down. Yi Qinshan and the rest turned even paler. A voice among the deafening shouts spread clearly over thousands of miles of mountains and rivers. The Dharma Supreme. He recited, smoke and beacons everywhere, staining the martial world with blood. If the heavens don't let me make the decision, what's wrong with massacring the human world? Feng Yuro said sternly, let's go. Her slim figure was the first to flash in the sky. At the moment when the lightning suddenly lit up the world, Feng Yuro's slim figure had already disappeared into the rain and fog. Morning. The heavy rain showed no signs of stopping. Instead, it became more and more intense. The earth rumbled with the pitter-patter of the rain. The entire sky was still pitch black. The law enforcement officers' army had already set up camp 150 miles away from the capital city. That murderous atmosphere that was full of destruction was still pressing down heavily. The capital city was in chaos. Cries filled the air, as if doomsday was coming. After an unknown period of time, the heavy rain continued, lightning and thunder continued to rumble. A voice, like the clashing of metal, was sonorous and powerful. Attack! Break through the north gate of the capital first. Obviously, the law enforcement officers couldn't wait any longer. Even though the rain was pouring down, they still insisted on attacking and massacring the capital. A series of shrill cries sounded continuously. The tens of thousands of experts on the law enforcement officers' side also attacked at lightning speed. In the midst of the heavy rain, each of them was like a malicious spirit coming out of seclusion. They actually launched the first wave of attack just like that. The law enforcement officers had traveled a long and arduous journey here and were facing a heavy rain that was rarely seen in hundreds of years. The Dharma Supreme actually didn't even reorganize the troops and didn't give them much time to rest, launching the attack early on. "Let me fight the first battle." Xiao Qinyu shouted and took the lead to charge out. Behind him were the few remaining experts of the Xiao clan and hundreds of thousands of martial world experts. Everyone looked sorrowful and indignant, but their expressions were resolute. They surged out of the north gate like a tidal wave, brazenly facing the law enforcement officers' army. Chapter 1679. It turns out that Chun Bo has always been an idiot. I used to be an idiot too. Unfortunately, I forgot about it later on. I've completely forgotten about it. Fortunately, I've remembered it now. Although it's a lot late, I've finally remembered it. If there's a next life, I won't make such a stupid mistake again. Dear brothers, if there's anyone who's still alive to see our fathers, kowtow for me, and also kowtow for Chuanbua. This way, Xiao Qinyu will have one less regret. Xiao Qinyu shouted, "Brothers, follow me and fight to the death. Fight to the death. Kill. Revenge. Killing one is enough. Killing one more is worth it? Ha, these are law enforcement officers. Normally, I don't even dare to look at them. I didn't expect that I would have the chance to kill a few of them today. Must I kill a few more? Ref equals HP // leguodo, art equals _ leguodo, greater than sign. Novel chapters are updated the fastest. / and There were bursts of wild laughter, sorrowful cries, and tragic cries. Hundreds of thousands of men of the martial world followed behind Xiao Qinyu. Like a huge arrow, they rushed towards the incoming law enforcement officers. Both sides let out deafening roars at the same time, causing the entire world to tremble. Then, both sides collided with each other like two meteors. This was only the first wave, but blood and flesh were already everywhere. Now, the battle has begun. Shall we go and take a look? Although it was a negotiating tone, Diwu Qingro stood up in the inn. Although it was important to protect Chu Yang and the others, Diwu Qingro didn't want to miss this battle. Without Diwu Qingro, the allied forces of the clans would collapse even sooner. Ling Muyang said, "Don't worry. I'll stay here to protect them. I won't let anyone have the chance to disturb them." Diwu Qingro said, "Okay. Mo Tianji can't come out now. I have to go to the front and watch. When Chu Yang and the others come out and ask about the situation, I'll explain it to them." After saying that, he smiled. He walked away. "Anshue, take a few people and escort Patriarch Diwu to the top of the city wall. Remember, you must not allow any mishaps to happen to him. This is the first condition." Ling Muyang immediately ordered. Ling Hanshui agreed and immediately set out, leading a dozen or so experts of the Ling clan to fly away. Yu Lingxue came out quietly. Looking at everyone's back view, his face was filled with heartfelt praise. "This Diwu Qingro is not bad." Ling Muyang nodded and said, "Yes, the most pleasing thing to look at is that this person is always doing what he is supposed to do, and he is always able to do it. Where is he supposed to be? Knowing when to advance and when to retreat, it's really hard to come by." Yu Lingxue chuckled. "That's right. The most valuable thing was that he was very clear about ZJ's position. With Tribulation Sword Master and Tribulation Brain Tank, he would be able to do whatever he wanted with Tribulation Sword Master and Tribulation Brain Tank. There is a huge difference between being an enemy and being a friend. But he was always sober. This is extremely rare. Ling Muyang blinked and said, "Master, you think so highly of this person. Could it be?" Yu Lingxue shook his head. He couldn't help but laugh. There is no point in talking about this now. The demon tribulation is now wreaking havoc on the world, and the outcome is unknown. Survival is unknown. It's useless to think too much about these things. The two of them smiled at each other at the same time. At this moment, on the battlefield, especially in the pouring rain, Xiao Qinyu took the lead. His long sword was like the wind. He roared as he took the lead and charged into the enemy's ranks. He didn't stop at all along the way. Around his body, at least several hundred people fell down as if he was cutting wheat. It only took a moment for him to do so. Left palm and right sword, unusually strong. As the sword light flashed, his left palm suddenly made a circle in the air, shook, and struck. The rain in the sky suddenly stopped. Then, countless bean-sized raindrops flew out along with the wind from his palm in the form of a rain of flowers. Under the vigorous force of his palm, these raindrops were as if they were made of steel. They were very powerful. Once they landed on people's bodies, transparent blood holes would appear on their bodies. With a single palm strike, millions of raindrops flew out at the same time. In an instant, more than 200 people fell to the ground. Almost everyone's body was like a sieve, with bloodlines as thick as soybeans spurting out in all directions. Screams, groans, and curses were heard. Xiao Qinyu chuckled and sent out another palm strike. Screams were heard in an instant, especially those who were seriously injured but not dead because of the raindrops. They rolled back and forth on the ground, but were constantly stepped on by their companions or enemies. The screams became more and more shrill. With Xiao Qinyu's profound cultivation as a supreme martial artist, he could use the rainwater to deal with these law enforcers who were mostly not even supreme martial artists. It was really invincible and easy for him to destroy them. He charged left and right with an unstoppable force, like a tiger charging into a flock of sheep. Behind him, the remaining hundreds of Shao clan experts and many people of the pugilistic world in the capital city could not help but be shocked when they saw this situation. They shouted and charged forward. How many people have come from Xiao Qinyu's side this time? The Dharma Supreme and Ping Xiaoyun sat opposite each other with a chessboard between them. Above their heads was a huge umbrella. Raindrops fell on the umbrella, splashing up countless raindrops, which were then shattered by the raindrops. Opposite them, Ping Xiaoyun's face was very ugly and extremely pale. He did not say a word, playing the game like a machine. The one who replied was an 8th grade supreme martial artist who was watching the battlefield closely from the other side. This person spoke very quickly and clearly. Lord Dharma Supreme, Xiao Qinyu's side has sent out a total of 103,400 people this time. That's not right. Just a moment ago, another batch of reinforcements rushed out. The total number of reinforcements is more than 400,000. The new batch of reinforcements that rushed out was Yi Qinshan, worried that Xiao Qinyu would be defeated by such a strong attack, so he sent out a 2nd-grade supreme martial artist from the clan to lead a large number of pugilistic world experts gathered at the North Gate to provide support. The number of reinforcements that were assigned to Xiao Qinyu back then was already 500,000. However, after Xiao Qinyu took the lead and rushed out, the several hundred people behind him stopped for some reason. When they stopped, the people behind them didn't know why and also stopped. In this way, there was a gap. Therefore, the first wave of troops that followed Xiao Qinyu out to battle only had 100,000 people. Seeing this, Yi Qinshan flew into a rage. He immediately sent people to kill the hundreds of people who stopped at the North Gate. Then, he sent out experts to lead the rest of the reinforcements to rush out. It was just that this so-called backup team was in a complete mess and had no order at all. As they attacked, there were actually people who kept slipping away. Thus, they were killed along the way. When they rushed over 50 miles and reached the battlefield where the two sides were fighting, they did not encounter any enemies along the way. Just the number of deserters that were killed alone was already in the thousands. On top of the city wall, everyone's expression was very ugly. Not only was this battle not optimistic, it was almost impossible to continue fighting. Although Xiao Yuchen's strong attack and temporary advantage boosted the morale of the army, the lack of reinforcements completely exposed the weakness of their side. Before the battle even started, the number of people who died at the hands of the enemy was already 1 in 100. And this was a battle that was going well. Once they lost, wouldn't they be defeated immediately? White light flashed, and an icy aura instantly came over. Without turning back, Yi Qinshan and the rest knew that the people from the Ling clan had come. Only the Ling clan could carry such an icy aura around them. Apart from them, Diwu Qingru had also rushed over. In the distance, the people from the Diwu clan were rushing over in the rain. The moment he saw the battle situation, Diwu Qingru's expression turned ugly. A motley crew, all of them are a motley crew. Diwu Qingru sighed repeatedly. With such a disorderly attack, what was the use even if they had more people than the enemy by several times? At the borders of the battle, corpses were strewn everywhere. Thousands of people died an unnatural death. There were even people who had not made a single move and could not even see what the enemy looked like. On the other hand, although the law enforcement team could not be said to be well-disciplined and well-trained, at least they had a certain level of discipline. How could this be called a battle? They were simply courting death. If Diwu Qingru was in command of the law enforcement team, he was absolutely confident that he could perfectly annihilate this motley crew with 3 times the number of troops. In fact, there might not even be too many casualties. The battle results would definitely be glorious. Lord Dharma Supreme, the enemy has no less than 400,000 troops, while we only have 100,000 troops. There is a huge disparity between the two sides. Shouldn't we send reinforcements? That 8th grade supreme martial artist was sweating a little. If the battle really went on like this, the Dharma Supreme would not allow anyone to command the battle on the spot. They could only fight based on the intuition of the people on the battlefield. Furthermore, their numbers were far less than the enemy's. Although the enemy's casualties were much more than their own, it was still a huge loss. What you said makes sense too. Then send another 240,000 troops. Let them have a fair battle and see who the final victory belongs to, the Dharma Supreme said without raising his head. Who will be in charge of commanding this battle? That 8th grade supreme martial artist asked awkwardly. Command? Why do we need to command? The Dharma Supreme's face darkened. He said coldly, the enemy is already commanding on the spot. Are we, the law enforcement officers, supposed to be commanding on the spot? That 8th grade supreme martial artist was stunned. Chapter 1680. Remember this for a second. But, no buts. In the end, they won this battle. Those who came back alive would be the backbone of the law enforcers in the future. They would gather together individually. As for those who die, they will naturally be washed away by the waves. There's no need to say more. The Dharma Supreme made his decision. The Dharma Supreme's argument sounded right but was wrong. Although what the Dharma Supreme said was reasonable, it was only suitable for the law enforcement officers to carry out their daily duties and not the current situation. The current situation was different from a typical fight in the pugilistic world, but it was also different from a normal confrontation between two armies. This was because the participants from both sides were a special army formed by large numbers of martial artists. Such an army actually needed a wise and far-sighted commander. Martial artists were superior to ordinary soldiers because they had far more energy, martial arts, and powerful combat power than ordinary soldiers, and even vitality that was not easy to die. However, martial artists were inferior to ordinary soldiers because they were arrogant and refused to obey the orders of their superiors. This was the biggest taboo of military strategists. Soldiers who did not listen to orders were like a sheet of loose sand. They could still be used if the battle went smoothly, but once they lost, they would easily be defeated. This was the case for the allied army of the aristocratic families. Although the law enforcement officers were in a slightly better situation, once they lost, the outcome would not be much better either. The Dharma Supreme's actions were equivalent to planting a super time bomb that would explode at any time. Under the Dharma Supreme's arbitrary actions, no one among the law enforcement officers could argue with him. Therefore, the battle situation was arranged as if it was child's play. However, the Dharma Supreme obviously did not care at all. After he finished speaking, he did not talk about this matter anymore. Only the faint black fog around him suddenly rose, and he asked thoughtfully, "Did the Tribulation Sword Master and his tribulation appear in this battle?" They did not participate in the battle. There were no spectators on the city wall either. The Dharma Supreme's eyes looked thoughtful. Then, he picked up the chess piece in his right hand and said calmly, "If the Tribulation Sword Master appears, tell me immediately." The reinforcements from the law enforcement officers entered the battlefield and joined the battle. The situation on the battlefield became more and more intense. Every moment, thousands of lives were lost. However, all the spectators on the city wall were confused and did not know what was going on. In particular, Diwu Qingru was the most unbearable. He was completely flabbergasted. His usual calmness was completely gone. Could a war be fought this way? The Dharma Supreme was crazy? Could it be that even his brain had gone haywire? How could such a thing happen? When the reinforcements of the enforcers entered the battlefield, the enforcers' morale immediately soared. This was not bad, but it was also natural. Xiao Chenyu and the others had already fallen into a trap. The situation could be said to be precarious. This was not bad, and it was only natural. The reason for this outcome was, of course, because of the reinforcements, but also because the law enforcers' military quality was much better than the aristocratic allied armies, and they had a set of rules. However, everyone could clearly feel that if the law enforcers had fought well in the previous battle, the entire team would be thrown into chaos when the reinforcements arrived. The number of people increased, but the formation was gone. Their battle prowess actually decreased instead of increasing. In the end, the members of the team were all martial artists. In the end, they weren't a truly well-trained army. As the battle dragged on, everyone's ferocious nature completely erupted. Everyone fought their own battles, and the entire battlefield turned into a pot of porridge. Or perhaps it should be said that they were made up of all kinds of martial artists, cultivators of all levels, and experts of all levels. Previously, a law enforcer was still cooperating closely with his comrade in arms. They covered each other's backs and charged left and right. However, when the reinforcements arrived, the two of them were forced apart. Then, when they met the enemy again, they were fighting their own battles. When the people around them were in danger, they didn't care at all. They only cared about their own safety. They watched as their comrade-in-arms were hacked to death and chopped into meat paste. However, they were still indifferent. They were still fighting fiercely and didn't lend a helping hand at all. Such situations were everywhere. It wasn't new at all. The heavy rain continued to fall, and the battle still didn't have any intention of stopping. The people on top of the city wall surged as they watched this seemingly intense but actually very strange battle. In the distance, the enforcers were also biding their time. They didn't take any follow-up actions. The rainwater on the ground gradually accumulated until it reached their ankles. What was on the ground was not only rainwater, but also blood. In fact, most of it was blood. As far as the eye could see, it was like a bright red ocean. This was also because this place was closer to the river and the water was discharged relatively quickly. Otherwise, these people might have drowned before the battle was over. Diwu Qingru also couldn't understand why the Dharma Supreme chose to start the battle in such a disadvantageous place for both sides. Such a battle mode and such a battle strategy weren't something that a wise man would do. Even from any angle, it was hard to understand. Any commander with a bit of intelligence wouldn't make such a mistake. Why would the Dharma Supreme do this? Diwu Qingru was extremely troubled. Yi Qinshan had already asked a few times. Clan Master Diwu, how should we adjust the current situation? Diwu Qingru couldn't answer this simple question at all. The place in front of them was very big, but also very bad. It was bad for both sides. It was even worse for the enforcers. Because the enforcers were completely unprotected and were drenched in the heavy rain. Their side was still in the city. At least they had a place to block the rain. Although this place was big, it could only accommodate a few 100,000 people at most. If there were more people, it would probably be even more chaotic. And it couldn't be used. The Dharma Supreme chose this place as the battlefield and made it clear that it was a fair battle. This was to prevent people like Diwu Qingru and Imo Tianji from interfering. Once you interfere, I'll take command. Anyway, the enforcers had the advantage. Once someone gave precise command, the ones who would die the fastest would be the people in the capital. In that aspect, the enforcers could be more effectively protected. Because their martial strength was high to begin with. Diwu Qingru shook his head dejectedly. Faced with such a situation, he was really helpless. There's really no good way. The Dharma Supreme is waiting for us to give command. Once we participate, the enforcers have a strict hierarchy to begin with. If everyone participates in the command, we'll be at a greater disadvantage. It's better to have such a chaotic battle where we can reap more benefits and kill more of the enemy's forces. Yi Qinshan sighed sadly. He wasn't a fool. How could he not see such a situation? He only asked Diwu Qingru for confirmation. If Diwu Qingru really had a way, he wouldn't believe it. The number of people on both sides of the battlefield was decreasing rapidly. The capital was surrounded by mountains on all sides, especially at the north gate. It was as if everyone was fighting in a huge basin. A total of 700,000 to 800,000 people were fighting. The area occupied was so huge that it stretched for hundreds of miles. Quite a number of people were at the outermost periphery, close to the foot of the mountain. Often, as they fought, both sides would scream and flee. Run outside. The situation now was really too terrifying. If there was a chance, run. As long as they could get out of the capital's area, they would be able to escape. As long as they could get over this mountain that was close at hand, they would already be out of the capital's area. Since that was the case, what were they waiting for? Therefore, the people at the outermost periphery started to disperse in batches. Regardless of whether they were law enforcement officers or martial artists, they all shared the same thoughts and principles. Unfortunately, without exception, those who had such thoughts were all killed by the enforcers' experts who had been waiting at the outermost periphery long ago, regardless of whether they were friend or foe. If these people who were waiting outside were to charge into the battlefield, they would definitely be a surprise force. They could even completely lock down the battle situation in an extremely short period of time. However, after these people finished killing, they quietly retreated. It was as if they didn't care about anything else on the battlefield. Of course, such a situation was not seen by the people at the top of the city wall. Firstly, the distance was too far. Secondly, the heavy rain obscured their vision. They could not see anything at all. Unknowingly, a morning had passed just like that. The number of people on both sides had increased to 300,000 to 400,000. The troops led by Xiao Chenyu had already been surrounded by the enforcers. They were surrounded in a huge encirclement, surrounded by enemies all around them. Fighting with all their might had become the only thing they could do at this moment. There were still more than 200,000 people on the enforcers' side, while there were less than 100,000 people on Xiao Chenyu's side. Victory and defeat had been decided. However, both sides had no intention of stopping, not even the slightest bit. 400,000 against 400,000, a fair battle. The Dharma Supreme's voice was mixed with a kind of indifference and a hint of mockery. This voice instantly penetrated the heavy rain and reverberated in the air. Everyone heard it clearly. The mockery in this sentence was like a knife, directly stabbing into Xiao Chenyu's chest. Xiao Chenyu had long been prepared to die in this battle. He had never intended to return alive. 400,000 against 400,000, his side had suffered a crushing defeat, and his men were wiped out. On the other hand, the other side still had close to half of their combat power. Xiao Chenyu could not afford to lose face like this. Upon hearing the Dharma Supreme's words, which were full of humiliation, Xiao Chenyu suddenly leaped into the air, bathed in blood. He shouted desperately, "No one is allowed to retreat. No one is allowed to come and help. A man's life should be like this battle. A bolt of lightning suddenly exploded in midair, illuminating Xiao Qinyu's leaping figure so clearly that even the slightest detail could be seen. At this moment, Xiao Qinyu was bathed in blood. Even his face was already covered in blood. His body was full of wounds and fresh blood was dripping down. On the top of the city wall, Yi Qinshan, who was about to give the order for reinforcements, had just opened his mouth when he suddenly became tongue-tied and stunned. He only felt an inexplicable pain in his heart. He knew that since Xiao Qinyu had said this, it meant that he had already made up his mind and did not intend to come back alive. He understood Xiao Qinyu's meaning and also his choice. Even if he could barely escape back with his extraordinary cultivation, in the face of the enforcer's combat power, it was only a matter of time before he died. Moreover, this escape would even damage his reputation. His reputation of 10,000 years would be shamed overnight. Chapter 1681. Since he was going to die sooner or later, what harm was there in dying a little earlier? Anyway, the entire Xiao clan had already been destroyed. Xiao Qinyu was also extremely heartbroken that he had forced Li Chuanbo to his death with his own hands. He was even more ashamed to face his elders. Since that was the case, so be it if he died. He deserved to die in the first place. The top of the city wall suddenly fell into an abnormal silence. Yi Qinshan suddenly lost his composure and tears flowed down his face. Xiao Qinyu had already landed on the ground. He fell into the crowd as though he had gone crazy. Screams of agony followed. The surroundings were silent and solemn. The number of people around Xiao Qinyu was decreasing rapidly. The high-level supreme martial artists of the law enforcement officers were all surrounding him. The pressure on Xiao Qinyu was also increasing correspondingly. However, no matter who the opponent was, as long as they exchanged blows for a moment, he would retreat immediately after sensing that the opponent was not weak and would specifically choose a place with more people to attack. Even if he was destined to die, he would do his best to kill as many people as he could and earn as many people as he could. Even though he was destined to suffer losses, it was better to suffer less losses. Xiao Qinyu didn't care about the consequences and didn't care about the losses. Everywhere he went, there were miserable screams. Countless heads were sent flying, and severed limbs were also flying all over the sky. A low-grade supreme martial artist deliberately avoided the battle. Even experts of the same grade could not do anything about it. They could not stop him at all. The high-level supreme martial artists of the law enforcement officers gritted their teeth and gave up on surrounding Xiao Qinyu. They turned and plunged into the crowd. Didn't you want to avoid the battle? Didn't you go around rescuing people? Didn't you want to kill people? All right, let's see who can kill more and who can kill faster. When you are the only one left, can you still avoid the battle? Can you still not fight? For a moment, the battle situation suddenly changed. 3 low-grade supreme martial artists and 7 to 8 8th-grade supreme martial artists of the law enforcement officers attacked at the same time. However, their opponents were just a group of people who were like ants to them. The situation took a sudden turn and changed drastically in an instant. One by one, they came and went as fast as lightning. However, behind them, heads were flying and their brains were splattered everywhere. One by one, they were chopped into 2. There were even more. His body was smashed into pieces and his bones turned into a bloody mist. The people on Xiao Qinyu's side were already in a weak defensive position. Now that they suddenly had to face such a one-sided massacre that they had no ability to resist, it was one disaster after another. The remaining people were also rapidly decreasing. None of the 200,000 law enforcement officers were idle. Even if everyone on Xiao Qinyu's side fought with their lives on the line and dared to die, but sometimes, in the face of absolute strength, even if they fought with their lives on the line, it was useless. Even if you wanted to fight with your life on the line, you must have the leeway to do so. Some people were already scared out of their wits and wanted to surrender. However, it was the same whether he said the words of surrender or not. Even if he threw away his sword and knelt on the ground, what greeted him was still a shining steel sword. Because the Dharma Supreme had said, Don't take prisoners. Kill them all. Surrender was not accepted. The sounds of fighting on the battlefield suddenly rose to the peak, and then began to fall gradually. At first, there were dead bodies everywhere, but now, screams could only be heard every once in a while. They were scattered everywhere. Xiao Chenyu stood at the most central position of the battle formation, holding his sword horizontally. At this point in the battle, by his side, there was no one else who was on his side anymore. The whole army was wiped out. A battle of hundreds of thousands of people. It was like slaughtering a pig or a dog together. Perhaps it was even faster. After all, when slaughtering pigs and dogs, one still had to deal with the corpses, internal organs and blood, but when it came to killing people, there was no need for such scruples at all. At Xiao Chenyu's feet, there were corpses everywhere, piled up layer after layer. The bottom 2 layers were completely soaked in the rain. There were also many corpses that had been trampled to pieces in the battle, but now no one cared about this anymore. Even the pouring rain couldn't take away the strong smell of blood that was almost condensed into a solid substance. Even the air seemed to have become sticky because of it. Xiao Chenyu's hair was constantly dripping with rain, his shoulders, arms, chest, thighs and calves. There were wounds everywhere, and most of the wounds were so deep that the bones could be seen. His body and his legs were all slightly trembling uncontrollably. In such an intense battle, this middle-grade Supreme Being's protective energy had long been completely depleted. After almost an entire day of continuous fighting, Xiao Chenyu also felt that he had already reached the edge of a lamp that had run out of oil. But he unexpectedly discovered that his spirit was actually unprecedentedly full. He was obviously about to die, but his spirit was unusually excited. This was something that hadn't happened in nearly 1,000 years. Even when he looked back on his life, it was extremely rare to be so excited. Haha! Xiao Chenyu stood tall in the air, facing countless strong enemies around him. Suddenly he burst into laughter. He laughed very arrogantly and carefreely, and the sword in his hand trembled violently with his laughter. He looked up to the sky and laughed, allowing the pouring rain to fall into his mouth, and he swallowed it just like that. What are you laughing at? On the opposite side, a middle-grade supreme martial artist looked at Xiao Chenyu with some pity, but deep in his eyes, there was a faint black flame flickering. Demonic aura. Xiao Chenyu didn't discover anything strange about this person. Or, even if he did, he already didn't care at this moment. I'm laughing. I've been in a daze for a generation, and I've finally felt satisfied today. Xiao Chenyu laughed heartily. It's a pity that life can't be restarted, but it's also good to understand at the last moment. It's also good. Hearing this, everyone on the opposite side was a little confused. They completely didn't know what Xiao Chenyu was talking about. But Yi Qinshin and the others on the city wall, especially the ancestors of the big clans, all felt a little touched in their hearts. Xiao Chenyu's words were very general, but they really spoke to the bottom of their hearts. Was life like this? The closer one was to the point of no return, the more one would feel the beauty of life that one had abandoned. The more one casually gave up on people or things, the more one would cherish the most, and the more one should cherish the most. It usually revolved around you, and when you needed it, it would come. When you didn't need it, it would still be there. You didn't care, and when it finally disappeared one day, you would still feel indifferent. Everything passed by peacefully just like that. But when you reached a certain point in time, you would suddenly realize that the most precious thing in life, the most worthy thing to cherish, was actually those wisps of indifference, and you had already lost them long ago. You would never be able to have them again. Even when you wanted to think of them, you would realize that even the slightest trace of them was gone. The regret at that time, at that moment, was truly too late for regrets. All the regrets were in Xiao Chenyu's one sentence. It's a pity that life can't be restarted. Xiao Chenyu laughed loudly, but tears slowly flowed down his cheeks, and he sobbed. No one knew what exactly he was thinking at this moment, and there was no way to guess either. When I was young, I burned incense generously. When I was young, I roamed the pugilistic world in my youth. When I toasted with you several times, I also cried to ease the sea of sorrow. When the wind and frost washed away our sworn brotherhood, glory and splendor wore away our heroic spirit. Our lifelong friendship ended like flowing water, and when we grew old, we met swords and flesh. Today, I look up to the sky and sigh, brother. I only regret that life can't be restarted. Li Chuanbua, did you see Xiao Qinyu's ending today? Have you calmed down, brother? Xiao Qinyu laughed loudly just like that, looking at the sky with tears flowing down his cheeks. Through his tears, it was as if Li Chuanbua's figure slowly appeared in that void. His eyes were still warm as he looked at Xiao Qinyu, revealing a sincere smile. Second brother Xiao, brother. Xiao Qinyu laughed loudly in surprise. I'm here. With a loud roar, he used his body to control the sword, using his spirit to control the sword. With a swoosh, he turned into the most dazzling bolt of lightning in the storm, and then exploded into the most resonant thunder in the sky. Boom! A low-grade supreme martial artist, Xiao Qinyu, self-destructed. The entire capital city shook violently because of this explosion. Outside the city, the place where Xiao Qinyu had self-destructed was cleared of an empty space with a radius of dozens of miles. It was a ghastly sight. The 3 8th-grade supreme martial artists, who were at the center of the explosion, also turned into smoke because of this. Only those few low-grade supreme martial artists were still considered to have reacted in time. They retreated at the last moment and were lucky enough to escape. They were only injured by the aftershocks of the explosion, and their eyes were still filled with lingering fear. More than 10,000 people lost their lives in this explosion. There was a sudden stagnation in the air. Even the heavy downpour seemed to have paused for a moment before it started to fall again. On the city wall, Yi Qinshan raised his head and roared. A mouthful of blood spurted out, and he suddenly burst into tears. Qiu's face was full of pain and sorrow. Tears streamed down his face as he murmured, "Today, I look up to the sky and sigh, brother. I only regret that I can't go back in time." Second brother Xiao, if Chuanbo knew that you were here today, even if he was in the spring, he would also raise his cup with a smile. He shouted and suddenly burst into tears. Second brother Xiao, if there's a next life, let's be good brothers. Zhuge Zhangqiong's body trembled. Tears streamed down his face, and his eyes were glazed over. As if in a daze, he murmured, "Today, I look up to the sky and sigh, brother. I only regret that I can't go back in time." Diwu Qingru sighed silently in his heart. Xiao Qinyu, this person, was finally dead. However, his life was really extremely complicated. It actually made one feel like they couldn't comment on it. Today, I look up to the sky and sigh, brother. I only regret that I can't go back in time. Since ancient times, how many regrets had there been? Why did he only realize this when he was on the brink of death? On the other side, the Dharma Supreme's eyes flashed fiercely. He murmured, "Today, I look up to the sky and sigh, brother. I only regret that I can't go back in time." Suddenly, he took a deep breath, his eyes full of viciousness. Chapter 1682. Since my life has already reached such a stage, why do I still want to be a bird in this fucking life? To hell with it. To hell with it. Go to hell. The Dharma Supreme cursed in his heart, but he felt a sudden pain in his heart. Then he stood up abruptly, his face cold and stern. The law enforcement officers around had followed the Dharma Supreme for 10,000 years, but they had never seen the Dharma Supreme's emotions become so violent in an instant. The destructive aura that surrounded his entire body was so crazy and shocking. It was just that this craziness was filled with a heart-wrenching feeling. Xiao Qinyu is dead. This time, the Xiao clan is completely finished. If another big clan is destroyed, how many clans are left? And the Yi clan, Ling clan, Chen clan, Shi clan? The Shi clan is only left with Shi Paoxiao. Is there anyone else? Forget it, no matter whether there is or not, it is going to be destroyed anyway. The Dharma Supreme's voice had a kind of indifferent cruelty. He said slowly, "Who is the next clan?" He stood up with his hands clasped behind his back. As soon as he raised his head, a pair of faint eyes shot out like demonic lightning. straight at the top of the city wall. The two places were separated by at least 100 miles and were obstructed by the heavy rain. However, his gaze seemed to have completely disregarded the obstruction of space and arrived just like that. Like two of the sharpest arrows, it shot straight into the hearts of Yi Qinshan and the others. Yi Qinshan and the other experts with high cultivation levels were startled by this sudden gaze. Everyone felt their hearts sink abruptly. For a moment, they actually felt their hearts waver and couldn't help but be shocked. The Dharma Supreme's current cultivation had obviously reached a level that even people like Yi Qinshan and the rest couldn't understand. He really had the power to shock the world and make the gods weep. With such cultivation, even Ning Tianya, who was known as the #1 in the world back then, definitely couldn't do it. The Dharma Supreme's voice came from afar. His voice was as calm and elegant as before. It even seemed to have some ease and confidence. Yi Qinshan, don't say that I didn't give you a chance. As long as you still fight one clan at a time, I won't bully you with numbers. In 10,000 years, there has never been a fair battle in the heavens. But today, I will give you a chance to have such a fair battle. I'm open and above board. Even if I'm purging a devil, I'll do it in a dignified manner. I'll make you all convinced. We'll send as many people as you send. They came one by one, and I welcome them one by one. Life or death, victory or defeat, leave it to fate. Yi Qinshan laughed mockingly. The Dharma Supreme's way of doing things is really too fair. Using a group of martial saints to deal with martial monarchs and martial emperors. You actually want to enjoy the fairness of having equal numbers. Puffer. The Dharma Supreme snorted coldly and said indifferently, Yi Qinshan, don't you know? If all of you were to participate in the battle royale, you would only be finished quickly. You wouldn't even be able to get such a result. The way the battle is going now at least gives you a chance to struggle at death's door, doesn't it? Yi Qinshan snorted coldly and did not speak again. Everyone knew. He also understood that the Dharma Supreme was speaking the truth. The Dharma Supreme's voice was calm and gentle in the heavy rain. As if he was speaking only 3 feet away from the other side, he said elegantly, Do you all think that my way of doing things is bullying the weak and that I have an unfair advantage? Don't you know that right and wrong are not based on reason? Justice is based on strength. I've not only given you fairness, I've also given you a chance to take revenge. The ones who dealt with the Shao clan just now were the law enforcement officers from the southeast side, as well as all the supreme martial artists from the headquarters in charge of the southeast. If Shao Qinyu had the ability to kill all of them, I would definitely not have any complaints. If he had the ability to take revenge, then he would be considered capable. Unfortunately, he doesn't have the ability to do so. Then, even if he dies, he shouldn't have any complaints. The strong win and the weak lose. This has been the way since ancient times. What complaints do you have? The Dharma Supreme said coldly, Yi Qinshan, which clan is going to fight in the next battle? No matter who wants to take revenge on the law enforcement officers, I'll also give them a chance. His voice still reverberated in the air, but the Dharma Supreme had already stopped talking. Both sides of the battlefield fell into a short period of dead silence. That 8th grade supreme martial artist who had been watching the battlefield trembled. He turned around and shouted, The Shao clan is finished. Who's going to fight next? Qinyu is gone. The Shao clan is finished. Yi Qinshan's lips couldn't help but tremble. Looking at the heavy rain and the shocking empty space, he muttered, Qinyu is gone. Who's going to fight next? Behind him, the faces of all the ancestors were unusually ugly, full of misery. There was also a strong sense of hatred. For Shao Qinyu, for their own clans. Tears were brewing in everyone's eyes. Humans were not plants, how could they be emotionless? Shao Qinyu was also an old brother of these people here for 10,000 years. Although there had been disagreements between them, there had been estrangement, and there had been unpleasantness between them. However, all of these conflicts had vanished into thin air at this moment. Even in death, Qinyu had lived up to the name of calamity. Qiu said quietly, Yes. The others nodded heavily. Who's going to take revenge in the next battle? Yi Qinshin's gaze was like lightning. The Dharma Supreme is right. Although this battle is a death trap, it's also a chance for revenge. Perhaps, it's the last chance for revenge. That's right. The people fighting opposite us are the ones who destroyed our clans. Of course, we have to take revenge. Let me take part in this battle. Even if I die, I'll make these murderers pay the price. Zhuge Zhangqiong snorted coldly. Do you think I'll back out from the battle? Let me go. Qiu Zheng said quickly, the enmity of the annihilation of our clan is irreconcilable. However, as everyone spoke, they realized that one person was missing from the conversation. Looking over, they saw that the ancestor of the Chun clan, Chen Yingfeng, had already walked down the city wall. Everyone was taken aback. These few days, Chen Yingfeng's behavior didn't seem quite right. It was as if he was a little cowardly and passive. Why did he take the lead to go down without saying a word this time? Could it be that he was triggered by Xiao Qinyu's death? Or could it be that the Dharma Supreme's mention of the word revenge had triggered him? To think that he actually went out on his own without saying a word. This fellow is really fast. Zhuge Zhangqiong said discontentedly, he didn't even greet us. Qiu was also displeased, but his voice was also full of respect. Chen Yingfeng is really acting like a real man today. This is the first time in 10,000 years that I've seen him so resolute. Yi Qinshin sighed. Speaking of which, the pressure on him these few days is really huge. However, if he goes out like this, the possibility of him coming back. He let out a long sigh. Zhuge Zhangqiong and Qiu also sighed at the same time. They looked at Chen Yingfeng's back view that was gradually disappearing into the distance, full of reluctance. With this departure, the brothers would probably never see each other again. From now on, they would be separated in the netherworld. Just as everyone was sighing, they heard Chen Yingfeng's voice of mobilization coming from below. After a long, long time, the city gates opened. Chen Yingfeng led the remaining 10-odd people of the Chen clan and walked to the front. Behind him, they were all the people that he had gathered these few days. Looking at the 10-odd lonely Chen clan members beside Chen Yingfeng and recalling the Chen clan's past glory, Yi Qinshin actually felt an inexplicable ache in his heart. His eyes reddened, and he hurriedly ordered, the Chen clan is alone now. If it's just the Chen clan's men alone, they probably won't even be able to control the troops. Quick, send some people to help. At his command, several hundred experts from the Yi clan followed closely behind. Zhuge Zhangqiong and Qiu sighed at the same time. They called out, Big brother. Yi Qinshin said sorrowfully, we're brothers. Even if I really have to leave today, I also have the responsibility to let my brother leave in a more glorious manner. Since there's no one left in his family, let the Yi clan members accompany him in death. Qiu and Zhuge Zhangqiong's eyes. They turned red at the same time. Diwu Qingrou's lips moved. He wanted to speak up to stop them, but in the end he didn't make a sound. Just now, at the moment Xiao Qinyu died in battle, Diwu Qingrou clearly saw a hint of heartfelt pleasure flash across Chen Yingfeng's eyes, as well as an extremely deep, complicated look. Although it was complicated, it was definitely not a look of resolute revenge. But right now, Diwu Qingrou couldn't say anything. He didn't even dare to say it. Even if he did say it out loud, the only outcome would be to be torn apart by Yi Qinshin and the others. Xiao Qinyu's death had just ignited the brotherhood that had lasted for more than 10,000 years. How could he allow others to speak ill of another brother in front of him? The truth had always been cruel, but the truth would always be the truth. No matter how cruel it was, when one had to face it, one could only accept it. Chen Yingfeng braved the wind and rain and walked forward, his aura extremely heroic. On the city wall, Yi Qinshin's expression was solemn. He sighed deeply. We've all misunderstood Yingfeng previously. Qiu's face was full of guilt. In the distance, the Dharma Supreme watched as Chen Yingfeng and the others walked out of the city gate in a single file. His eyes flashed and he waved his hand. Clean up the battlefield. Before his voice had died away, the 4 second-grade supreme martial artists struck at the same time. With a whoosh, the countless corpses on the battlefield were suddenly moved collectively. Then, like hailstones, They piled up into a huge circle. The highest point was actually a full 1,000 feet high. This circle, which covered an area of dozens of square miles, was completely occupied by countless corpses. It was just that the center was empty. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The troops ran to Dongxing. Behind the law enforcement officers, there were countless people. Each of them carried a huge metal bucket and flew over. They leaped onto the high wall made of corpses. Then, they poured the contents of the metal bucket down. The next moment, a special smell filled the air. Kerosene. The metal bucket was actually filled with a huge amount of kerosene. Tens of thousands of barrels of kerosene were poured into the center of the circle at the same time. Then, a few more torches soaked in kerosene were set ablaze in the pouring rain. Those torches drew brilliant arcs in the air and landed on the huge amount of kerosene. Boom! In an instant, a huge fire rose into the sky. Setting fire in such a heavy downpour, this was really an unprecedented feat, and what was burning were human bodies that were still alive and kicking just a moment ago. At this moment, regardless of status, they were all burned to the ground. They were just corpses, nothing more. No matter if you were a hero or a rogue or a beggar before your death, you were just a corpse now. Chapter 1683. There was a constant stream of people watching from the outside. Those that couldn't be burned would be picked up in the air and thrown into areas where the sea of fire was more vigorous to be burned as quickly as possible. A unique smell of burning flesh gradually filled the area within a radius of thousands of miles. It wouldn't take long for this smell to spread throughout the entire capital city. In fact, there were already quite a number of people in the capital city sniffing frantically. Why are there still people roasting meat in such terrible weather? Why does it smell so weird? Outside the city, be it the law enforcement officers or the people of the big clans on the city wall, they all looked at the soaring flames with a solemn expression. Regardless of friend or foe, all would be burned to ashes today. This move of the Dharma Supreme was undoubtedly vicious, but also decisive enough. Moreover, this action seemed to have some other meaning. But now that everyone's eyes were red, they couldn't be bothered to think about anything else. On the battlefield, the burning of the corpses gradually came to an end. 2 8th-grade supreme martial artists moved their palms at the same time and pushed out fiercely. With a splash on the ground, be it blood or rainwater, all of them were lifted up together with half an inch of the ground. It was like a huge curtain being lifted up by someone. Both of them shouted and exerted their strength again at the same time. With a whoosh, all the rainwater and blood were carried by the huge curtain and thrown over the mountain. On the other side of the mountain, there was a violent roar that sounded like the sky was falling and the earth was cracking. Then, the few supreme martial artists moved one after another. In the blink of an eye, the land that was full of craters due to the great battle was restored to a flat state. Moreover, even the accumulated water stains were not much left. In the still pouring rain, it actually became a rare, dry, and refreshing land. The power of a supreme martial artist. It could move mountains and fill the sea. At this moment, this sentence was fully verified. The previous battle team retreated to rest, the other team will be replaced. Who was the one who destroyed the Chen clan a few days ago? The Dharma Supreme ordered, "Go forward and fight Chen Yingfeng." Yes. Not much time passed and Chen Yingfeng had already walked to the front of the two armies. The delicate moment when the two sides were about to come into contact and fight was the moment when enemies met. Chen Yingfeng suddenly raised his hand and shouted, "Wait! I have something to say. Lord Dharma Supreme, can we talk?" For a moment, both sides were stunned. At this point, was there still a need to talk? In the face of a powerful enemy who killed your descendants and destroyed your home, you still want to negotiate. What else could they talk about? On top of the city wall, Yi Chenshin frowned. Both parties are already destined to be mortal enemies. What's the point of talking? There was no way the Dharma Supreme would stop now. Do you still think you can persuade him? Diu Qingro forced a smile and said, Perhaps there are other variables. Chen Yingfeng might not be advising. Variable? Yi Qinshan frowned and suddenly flew into a rage. You mean to say that Yingfeng isn't trying to persuade the Dharma Supreme but is surrendering to the Dharma Supreme? How dare you say that? How dare you think that? A martial artist must have strength of character. My brother is definitely not that kind of person. Diwu Qingro forced a smile. Before he could continue speaking, Shi Baoli, Autumn, and Zhuge Zhangqiong had already glared at him and cursed at the same time. Bullshit. Shut up. Diwu Qingro gently shook his head. He forced a smile and no longer spoke. Now is the time. There was obviously no meaning to it at all. The other side was obviously stunned as well. After a moment, the Dharma Supreme's voice came from afar. Qin Yingfeng, what do you want to talk to me about? Between us. What else is there to talk about? You can't be delusional to think that you can mislead me and accuse me of being a slave of the extraterrestrial demons, right? Qin Yingfeng's somewhat feminine voice sounded. Lord Dharma Supreme, please don't misunderstand. Naturally, I have something important to discuss with you. The reason why Lord Dharma Supreme wants to wipe out the big clans is probably to rule the world. Yes, it should be to wipe out the big clans that have been demonized by the extraterrestrial demons. And now, this capital city is already the last fortress of the big clans. Lord Dharma Supreme wants to cleanse the world. It's nothing more than to further eliminate the dissidents and achieve complete control. Since that's the case, Qin Yingfeng would like to discuss terms with Lord Dharma Supreme, terms that are beneficial to both parties. The Dharma Supreme's voice seemed to be deep in thought for a moment. Terms. I'm willing to bury the hatchet with the law enforcement officer in front of me and turn from an enemy to a friend. Furthermore, I'm willing to lead the people behind me to surrender to Lord Dharma Supreme. I only hope that Lord Dharma Supreme will be lenient. There are so many people here, all of them are children raised by their fathers and mothers. They still have relatives waiting for them at home, their mothers leaning against the door, their lovers waiting for them. How can I, Qin Yingfeng, bear to let them die in battle with me? I can guarantee that none of these people here have been demonized by the extraterrestrial demons. With Lord Dharma Supreme's benevolence, I believe that he will be lenient. These words were simply earth-shattering. Be it Yi Qinshan and the other people in the capital city, or the law enforcement officers on the Dharma Supreme's side, almost everyone couldn't believe their ears. They actually couldn't react for a moment. It was only until they took 2 deep breaths that they finally digested these absolutely unexpected words. In an instant, there were curses everywhere. Qin Yingfeng, you're shameless. Qin Yingfeng, are you still human? Qin Yingfeng, don't forget who annihilated your clan and killed your relatives. You bastard! Before Qin Yingfeng could finish his words, there was already a flurry of curses on top of the city wall. Yi Qinshan was so angry that he was trembling all over. He was almost about to vomit blood. The few elders would never have thought that Qin Yingfeng would walk out in such a heroic manner just to surrender. Not only did he surrender, in order to successfully surrender, he even didn't hesitate to slander himself and say that the real source of chaos in the world was the big clans being demonized by the extraterrestrial demons. He was facing a powerful enemy that had annihilated his clan and killed his grandchildren. Surrender? This was really absurd to the extreme. Zhuge Zhangqiong, Qiu He, Shi Baoli, and the others all had faces as red as blood. They were so embarrassed that even their necks were bulging. Just now, Diwu Qingro had said something, and the 3 of them had cursed him. But they had just finished cursing, and their voices were still ringing in their ears when their own brothers gave them a resounding slap in the face. Too embarrassing. It was too embarrassing. This is such a disgrace. Those people that Qin Yingfeng had brought out, especially those from the Yi clan who had come to help control the troops, all started cursing furiously. Qin Yingfeng completely ignored them and only waited for the Dharma Supreme's response. He believed that the Dharma Supreme wouldn't refuse this huge gift of his. As long as the Dharma Supreme accepted it, he would be safe. What did a few curses mean? Was it more important than his life and limitless future? With a wave of the Dharma Supreme's hand, a few high-level supreme martial artists released their powerful aura at the same time, instantly suppressing the commotion. As for the few who were especially noisy, The few high-level supreme martial artists of the law enforcement officers simply attacked together and killed them instantly. As blood spurted out, the commotion stopped. The troops on Qin Yingfeng's side were in a commotion for a while more before they gradually regained their calm. What you said makes some sense. It's even rarer that you can admit your own shortcomings. The Dharma Supreme said amiably, but since you're willing to surrender, you must have other conditions, right? Why don't you tell me and I'll consider it carefully? Chen Yingfeng said, I can bring people to surrender this time because I'm naturally willing to follow Lord Dharma Supreme to conquer this world and be at your beck and call. How would I dare to ask for any conditions? I'm even willing to fight back. If I have any extravagant request, I only have one thing to ask of Lord Dharma Supreme. After this battle, let my brothers go home and give them a way out. I believe that Lord Dharma Supreme won't be stingy with this small request. The Dharma Supreme smiled and nodded. Everyone also completely understood Qin Yingfeng's intentions at this moment. He wanted to use the surrender to win the hearts of these people behind him. Although the Qin clan had been destroyed, it wasn't impossible to rebuild it. And rebuilding it required manpower. He had hundreds of thousands of people behind him now. As long as Qin Yingfeng was around, it would be another super clan after the battle. Moreover, he didn't hesitate to ruin his own reputation this time to save the lives of these people. They were all living dishonorably with him, and unknowingly, they were of one heart with him. From the moment Qin Yingfeng proposed to surrender, the hundreds of thousands of people behind him only stirred for a short while before they calmed down. It was obvious that people's hearts were like this. Even if there were still a few loyal ones among them, the general trend was that almost everyone had surrendered. What was the use of only holding on? Not to mention that he only had a low cultivation level, so what if he was a second-grade supreme martial artist? If he were to hold on, people would think that he was something special, and he was killed to show his loyalty. That would be an injustice. This was the herd mentality of people. Even those experts of the Yi clan sent by Yi Chunshin didn't move anymore. A bad life was better than a good death. Since everyone had surrendered, then everyone would lose face together. Since they had lost face, what did it matter if they surrendered? It was fine as long as they could stay alive. As long as the Dharma Supreme promised to surrender today, Qin Yingfeng only had to wait for the battle to end. When the time came, as long as Qin Yingfeng raised his arms and called for the establishment of the Qin clan, the Dharma Supreme wouldn't be stingy and not give him face because he had done a great service to the law enforcement officers. By then, the Qin clan might not just be one of the big clans. It would be the only clan in the world other than the law enforcement officers. It might even be the biggest clan in the upper three heavens, or even the entire heavens. Qin Yingfeng's intentions were no secret at all. It was obvious at a glance. However, this was also the only condition that could be exchanged with the Dharma Supreme now. On top of the city wall, Yi Chunshin finally spat out a mouthful of blood with a cry. He cried out loudly, "Qin Yingfeng, you're shameless. You've disgraced us and tarnished the reputation of the descendants of tribulation, you beast." Chapter 1684. Qiu roared furiously, "Qin Yingfeng, wake up! Even if you can survive on the enemy's charity, can you still sleep in the future?" Qin Yingfeng had a smile on his face throughout, as if he didn't hear the torrential curses behind him. His skinny face was clearly visible in the light of the burning corpses of his comrades. "Lord Dharma Supreme, what do you think of my suggestion?" Qin Yingfeng asked calmly. "Good. It's rare for Yingfeng to realize his mistake. How can I not agree?" The Dharma Supreme laughed loudly. "I accept Yingfeng's suggestion. Now that we have Yingfeng's help, we can eliminate the demonic tribulation faster. I hereby promise that after the war, I will definitely allow the Qin clan to rebuild and share the prosperity of the world with you." "Thank you, Lord Dharma Supreme." Qin Yingfeng was overjoyed. "Open up the sides of the formation and welcome Qin Yingfeng and his people in. From now on, we are all one family." The Dharma Supreme laughed loudly, his voice reverberating in 100 miles. Although many people in Qin Yingfeng's team looked aggrieved, Most of them also heaved a sigh of relief. "Oh my God, we finally survived. What a fluke, what a fluke." On the city wall, Yi Chunchin and the others were still cursing endlessly. However, even more people were secretly thinking in their hearts, "If I were like this when the time comes to surrender, would I be able to?" The densely packed law enforcement officers lined up on both sides, leaving a wide path that was a few thousand feet wide between them. However, the Dharma Supreme welcomed Chen Yingfeng's surrender with the highest etiquette. At this moment, Chen Yingfeng felt that he was actually very respected. Although the Chen clan that had been passed down for 10,000 years was destroyed in the hands of the Dharma Supreme, as long as he was still alive, the Chen clan could be rebuilt in the future. It would definitely surpass the Chen clan of the past. Revenge was a dish best served cold. Who could say for sure what would happen in the future? The most important thing now was that he could finally survive. Chen Yingfeng smiled wholeheartedly and cupped his fists, greeting both sides. Then, after a discussion among the law enforcement officers, all the surrendering teams were arranged into a line of 2,000 people and walked forward to be inspected by the Dharma Supreme. Chen Yingfeng had no objections to this. If he didn't even receive this treatment, it would be suspicious instead. The messy troops were lined up according to the requirements of the law enforcement officers. During this period, the people sent by the Yi family also resisted. However, after a dozen of them were killed on the spot, the remaining people also quieted down, as if they had already accepted their fate. After a period of gathering and adjustment, it was already night time, and the rain finally began to lessen. Looking at the surrender ceremony that was filled with cheers outside the city, everyone on the city wall felt their bodies turn cold. Chen Yingfeng's actions were tantamount to stabbing a knife into everyone's heart. And they even took so many people with them. The surrender ceremony finally began. The law enforcement officers on both sides stood solemnly. Chen Yingfeng took the lead and led the team forward. At the end of the road, they could not see it. He could vaguely feel that there was a powerful figure waiting for him somewhere. That was the Dharma Supreme. Chen Yingfeng heaved a sigh of relief once more. The fact that the Dharma Supreme had personally accepted his surrender showed how much he valued him. The surrendering troops entered the area one by one. A row of 2,000. Of the hundreds of thousands of people who had followed Chen Yingfeng out, there were finally more than 200 rows. There was hope for survival. Everyone walked very quickly, and their moods were also lifted. Finally, everyone entered the area arranged by the law enforcement officers. At the front, the Dharma Supreme laughed heartily, leading a group of high-level experts from the law enforcement officers to welcome them. Chen Yingfeng was very excited. He took a few quick steps forward, ready to shake hands with the Dharma Supreme. Just as he got closer, he saw the smile on the Dharma Supreme's face suddenly freeze in an instant, turning into the color of ice. Then he ordered, "Kill these people here for me. Kill all of them and leave no one alive." This sudden order was simply like the collapse of the heavens and the earth. The smile on Chen Yingfeng's face suddenly froze, and his eyes widened in disbelief. "Lord Dharma Supreme?" The Dharma Supreme's face was as cold as ice. "A treacherous and despicable person like you, a scum that is so despicable and shameless that you can even betray your own brothers, is the biggest symptom of being demonized by the extraterrestrial demons. A demon like you, who can bring disaster to the human world, actually wants to negotiate terms with me? Just wishful thinking." At his command, the law enforcement officers who were already prepared all around moved at the same time. "Kill!" Suddenly, the light from the sabers and swords formed the waves of the sea. Then, extremely thick and dense blood spurted out. The whole sky and the whole area instantly turned bright red. Under such a situation where they were completely unprepared, they had completely fallen into the enemy's encirclement. Moreover, there was a great disparity in the number of people on both sides. The quality and quantity of experts were all more than 10 times, or even more. Chen Yingfeng's misery at this moment could be said to have reached its peak. When the law enforcement officers attacked together, they were basically going all out. What, man and sword as one, man and saber as one. In any case, they just used whatever powerful moves they knew. They went all out to kill these completely unprepared and defenseless enemies. The battlefield, spanning dozens of miles, was attacked from both sides. It was just a brief encounter, and hundreds of thousands of people had already lost their lives in a daze. Chen Yingfeng's eyes widened, and he roared furiously, "Dharma Supreme, how dare you lie to me?" The Dharma Supreme's face revealed an extremely disdainful smile, and he retreated lightly. He didn't even bother to kill Chen Yingfeng with his own hands. Chen Yingfeng roared furiously and pounced forward. "Dharma Supreme! Don't leave! I want to fight to the death with you! You damned liar!" However, the few law enforcement officers beside the Dharma Supreme had already blocked him. "Death is at hand, and you still want to fight the Dharma Supreme. Do you think a despicable, shameless, lowly, low-level demon like you is worthy?" Then they started to fight. In an instant, the sounds of fighting shook the heavens and earth. Or rather, it shouldn't be called a fight, but a one-sided massacre. The incident had only just happened here, but everyone on the top of the city wall had already heard it. Hearing such a shocking turn of events, everyone on the top of the city wall didn't know what to do for a moment. Everyone who was still cursing and swearing just now also unknowingly became tongue-tied. They couldn't make a single sound. Seeing these people who were surrounded and almost defenseless being slaughtered, the only thing Yi Qinshan and the others could do was to close their eyes weakly. Although he felt happy, how could he not feel sorrowful? Hundreds of thousands of people sent themselves to be deceived and then slaughtered almost defenseless. How aggrieved must they be to die? Everyone in the city also kept quiet out of fear. Some of those who were thinking of surrendering even felt as if they had been doused with cold water, chilling them to the core. It turned out that surrendering couldn't work either. "Oh my God, what should we do? Aren't we doomed?" This battle started abruptly and ended abruptly as well. This one-sided massacre only took about an hour from start to finish, and those hundreds of thousands of people had already turned into corpses. On the other hand, the law enforcement officers didn't suffer any losses at all, and the casualties were almost negligible. The battle line was too long, and the law enforcement officers were too well prepared. They each had their own duties, and each of them aimed at a few people before attacking. These people were completely on guard. How could they possibly escape? Chen Yingfeng screamed and flew into the sky, covered in blood all over. His cultivation was also quite high, and he actually managed to break through the encirclement of death and flew toward the city. "Big Brother Yi, save me! Save me!" On the city wall, Yi Qinshan's face was as cold as ice, and he didn't move at all like a zombie. Beside him, Zhuge Tengqiong and Autumn both spat on the ground and turned their faces away furiously. "Save you? After doing such a thing, you still have the cheek to ask us for help? You're also a 10,000-year-old monster, yet you still have the cheek to ask us for help? When has Tribulation, the ancestor of the great clans, ever asked for help? Do you know that by asking for help, you've trampled all our old faces to the ground for others to trample on?" A few supreme martial artists caught up from behind, and their fists, legs, and swords rained down like a storm. With a scream, Chen Yingfeng was sent flying by a punch. Then, his body couldn't move on its own anymore. Another mid-grade supreme martial artist flashed like a ghost and was already below Chen Yingfeng. He kicked his lower abdomen fiercely. Chen Yingfeng groaned in extreme pain and his whole body flew up involuntarily. However, there was already another person waiting for him in the air. He slapped his back hard with both palms, and then stomped down hard on his back. The low-grade supreme martial artist below stabbed his sword into Chen Yingfeng's chest, while the other supreme martial artist slapped his temples on both sides with both hands. With a few cracking sounds, Chen Yingfeng's bones broke. His head also exploded completely like a watermelon that had been hit by an explosive bomb, and his brain juice splattered everywhere. With a boom, he didn't know that person's final palm strike landed on his dantian. His divine soul was completely shattered, and his divine soul was completely destroyed. Just like that, the Chen clan's first ancestor turned into a mist of blood and flesh that drifted through the air in front of everyone's eyes. The place where he died was already not far from the city wall. There were many experts up there, but no one was willing to come out to save him. They just watched helplessly as the 4 low-grade supreme martial artists went on a killing spree in front of them, beating Chen Yingfeng from a complete person into meat paste. The 4 supreme martial artists turned and left, disappearing from everyone's sight in an instant. Yi Qinshin and the others were dumbstruck. It was already late at night. The Dharma Supreme's voice came from afar. Now, the Chen clan is also finished. Who's next to go up against the law enforcement officers? Don't blame me for not making it clear. As long as you dare to fight, I won't be stingy with giving you a fair chance. If no one dares to fight, by then the army will be mobilized, and the city will be destroyed. Chapter 1685. The muscles on Yi Qinshin's face spasmed. He said, "Chiu, you go first. Big brother will follow right after." Chiu burst into laughter. He turned around and strode out, shouting, "Grandson, follow me into battle. Grandsons of the Yi family, come and help out too. Troops from the main force, it's our turn now. If you're a man, follow me into battle and die." Chiu had just finished speaking. With a loud boom, the people of Jianghu who had already given up all hope in the capital instantly stood up in droves. They roared in unison, "It's our turn. Go into battle and die. Fight it out with those damned law enforcement officers." Chiu's words were extremely straightforward. They were going into battle and dying. They were going to die. However, it was precisely such straightforward words that greatly stirred up the blood in the hearts of the martial artists at this moment. Since death was inevitable, then they would die heroically in battle. Fight it out. In fact, some people who didn't originally belong to Chiu's camp also spontaneously joined in at this moment. So be it. Who's afraid of whom? The law enforcement officers have 2 eyes, but we also have only 1 head. The law enforcement officers have something in their crotch, but I also have a bird in my crotch. Damn it. Fight it out. There was a hubbub and loud shouts as though venting. Everyone went out of the city in a hubbub with weapons in hand. Although their formation was disorderly, everyone had an awe-inspiring aura and held their heads high. If there was still a chance of survival, I wouldn't die. But since I'm already destined to die, I must die like a man. The battle continued for an entire night and still hadn't stopped. For an entire day and night, the entire capital trembled endlessly, as though it had been hit by continuous earthquakes. All the houses shook their butts and danced, gently and rhythmically. No one knew if this could be considered a blessing in disguise, but there were very few signs of collapsing. Although the downpour that happened once in 100 years had lessened, it continued to fall, as though it could continue for a long time. Outside the city, the raging fire didn't stop either. Without a doubt, the first wave of incineration had been sent very far away, but as long as there were more deaths, the fire would continue to burn the corpses. The raging fire continued to burn for an entire night. The unique smell of roasted meat naturally continued to permeate the air throughout the night. People could be seen vomiting everywhere in the capital. They had just finished vomiting, but once they came into contact with the strange smell again, they would continue to vomit. No matter how slow-witted or ill-informed a person was, they would know that this smell came from the burning of a large number of corpses. How many corpses had been burned in this heavy rain and smoke-filled environment for a day and a night? Perhaps in the near future, or perhaps today, or perhaps he understood that he would become one of the people being burned, right? As long as he thought about it, his entire body would tremble, and his heart would feel waves of disgust. After a night of fierce fighting, the people who had accompanied Chiu to battle were already burning with anger. At the end of this battle, a violent explosion rang out. As tears streamed down Yi Qinshin's face, Autumn followed in Xiao Qinyu's footsteps and became a legend among the enforcers. However, less than 30,000 of the law enforcement officers who fought against him survived in the end. The tenacity of Chiu's troops made all the law enforcement officers' jaws drop. There was clearly a great disparity in their strength, and it was clearly the enemy who was stronger than them, but the courage, perseverance, and fighting spirit displayed by the allied army of the aristocratic clans were breathtaking. I'm not as strong as you, so I'll die with you. They didn't seek complete victory, but only sought to cripple the enemy. They didn't fear the strong enemy, and even sought death first. This completely swayed the balance of victory and defeat. If not for the fact that the difference in strength between the two sides wasn't that great, the final outcome would have been hard to predict. Seeing that less than 30,000 injured warriors finally retreated from the battlefield, the people on the law enforcement officers' side felt fear for the first time. A chill ran down their spines. They had lost 470,000 people in this battle. There were only 30,000 survivors left, and most of them were crippled. They would never be able to recover to their peak in this lifetime. There was clearly a great disparity in strength between the two sides, but the final outcome was so tragic. Everyone's gaze turned to the Dharma Supreme. At this moment, the Dharma Supreme's face was still gloomy and expressionless. He only waved his hand and ordered, "Clean up the battlefield immediately and wait for the next battle. As long as the demons are not destroyed, the battle will not stop." "Lord Dharma Supreme," a high-level supreme martial artist pleaded, "let our brothers rest a little. We are all made of flesh and blood, and after going through such a tragic battle, we were even drenched in such a downpour for 2 days and 1 night. The Dharma Supreme said indifferently, "Who isn't made of flesh and blood? Who didn't fight for an entire night? Who didn't get drenched in the rain? Could it be that only our people are here? What right do you all have to be so fragile?" "But, no buts. The battle will not end, and we will kill all of you." The Dharma Supreme ordered coldly, "Anyone who disagrees, kill. Kill. No mercy." Everyone kept quiet out of fear, and no one dared to say a word. The Dharma Supreme now had a heart as cold as steel, to the point where there was no room for mercy. Looking at the Dharma Supreme's cold and emotionless face, everyone could only follow his orders. Everyone knew that the Dharma Supreme's words were not a joke. Before this, in the entire Heavens continent, nearly 20 million souls had died tragically within a short span of 10 days, and this had long been proven. The Dharma Supreme was definitely a man of his words. His words were strictly enforced, and his orders were strictly enforced. Although the law enforcement officers were also exhausted, under such a high-pressure order, they still divided some people to clean up the battlefield and continue burning the corpses. The Dharma Supreme looked at the city wall again, his heart full of doubts. "Chu Yang, as the Tribulation Sword Master, you are already at the final juncture of the demon tribulation. Why haven't you appeared yet? What exactly is Chu Yang doing now?" Although Chu Yang had not appeared, the Dharma Supreme had always had an intuition that the only one who could stop his madness was Chu Yang. The only one who could stop his madness was Chu Yang. However, the Dharma Supreme was full of fighting spirit. Just as he had said, he would not show mercy in the battle with the Tribulation Sword Master. "Chu Yang, if you fail, then you will tarnish the great title of Tribulation Sword Master. Then I will not allow you to live, because a loser is not worthy of being called my boss, and is not worthy of that legendary title." The top of the city wall was originally filled with densely packed heads. However, it had become much more sparse at this moment. At this moment, only Yi Qinshan, Zhuge Tangqiong, and Shi Paoxiao were still standing there. The three of them had the same expression, which was full of complex emotions. It contained pride, grief, resentment, and determination. Shi Paoxiao suddenly let out a long sigh. He took out a jade bottle and slowly opened it. He chuckled and said, "A few days ago, the Tribulation Sword Master asked Diwu Qingru to give me this heavy pill. I had many worries. Although we have temporarily formed an alliance due to our standpoints, the opposition between the big clans and Tribulation is still inevitable. How can I accept the enemy's good fortune?" After that, it was hard to distinguish between gratitude and grudges, so I didn't take it. But today is a battle of revenge, so I don't care so much. If I owe it, then so be it. Anyway, I probably won't have the chance to repay it in this lifetime. Finally, we are on the same side and have a common enemy. I hope this heavy pill can help me kill a few more enemies, so that this can lessen my guilt a little. When I go on my way later, I don't have to worry too much about this matter. Deceiving oneself and others, deceiving others and deceiving oneself, so this is what it is. As he spoke, he opened the jade bottle. The moment a strange fragrance wafted out, he had already swallowed the heavy pill. Yi Qinshan forced a smile and said, "What do you mean by deceiving oneself and others, deceiving others and deceiving oneself? I believe the Tribulation Sword Master won't care about this little bit of friendship. You can rest assured. Besides, you and I are going to be dead soon. The dead don't need to repay anything." Ah. Shi Xiao looked up and laughed. Zhuge Zhangqiong smiled and said, "Big brother, next, it seems to be my turn to take revenge." Yi Qinshan looked up and sighed. He said, "The big clans have been famous for 10,000 years. It turns out that 10,000 years is indeed predestined. Today, it is indeed time for them to be destroyed. It's just that the only thing that I didn't expect was that the big clans weren't destroyed by tribulation this time, but by the law enforcement officers. No, that Dharma Supreme was also one of tribulation back then, tribulation's brains. It turns out that the big clans can't escape this cycle. At this moment, everything seems so superfluous and meaningless." Zhuge Zhangqiong smiled and said, "The brothers have all left one by one. Now, other than the three of us, there's only Ling Muyang, who is with the Tribulation Sword Master now. 10,000 years ago, there were 7 sisters. Now that the sisters are no longer around, there are only 4 brothers left. Yes, I don't know if Muyang is still willing to treat us as brothers now. It's really not a very glorious thing to have brothers like us." Shi Xiao wanted to laugh, but he felt a lump in his throat and couldn't laugh. He said, "Muyang hates evil, but he's actually very soft-hearted. How can he not treat us as brothers, especially brothers who are about to die? If you ask me, we're all going to die sooner or later. It doesn't matter if we die a few days earlier or a few days later. We mustn't drag it out until the time when Muyang really doesn't want us brothers anymore. Then we'll really be done for." The 3 of them burst into laughter at the same time. "It's just a pity that bastard Shen Yingfeng." Deep hatred appeared in Yi Qinshan's eyes. He said, "That bastard. Even when he's about to die, he still smeared his brother's ashes. This really makes me furious. But other than that bastard, most of us still live up to our late father's reputation." Although Zhuge Zhangqiong's eyes were red from grief, there was a kind of clear radiance on his face. "This is already enough." Yi Qinshan and Shi Xiao nodded heavily at the same time. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.